Section 1. The origin story: how Family Guy came to exist. Let's go all the way back. Before there was a Griffin family, before there was Peter stumbling through Quahog, before there was Stewie monologuing in a diaper about world domination, there was a young man named Seth Woodbury MacFarlane, sitting in a classroom in Providence, Rhode Island, trying to figure out what kind of animator he wanted to be. Seth MacFarlane was born on the 26th of October, 1973, in Kent, Connecticut. He grew up in a small New England town, the kind of quiet place where you have a lot of time to draw, and he used that time well. By the time most kids his age were figuring out what clubs to join in high school, MacFarlane was already developing a voice as a cartoonist. He had a natural eye for comedic timing that translated directly onto paper, and he had ambitions that were impossible to contain within the walls of a suburban Connecticut upbringing. He went on to study at the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most prestigious art and design schools in the country. At RISD, he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a focus in animation, and it was there that his professional career took its first real shape. He did not intend to work for the studio he would ultimately end up at first either. By several accounts, MacFarlane had set his sights on working for Disney before ultimately changing his mind after graduating, deciding he wanted to build something of his own rather than become a small piece of someone else's machine. During his senior year at RISD, MacFarlane created a short animated film as his thesis project. He called it The Life of Larry. It was an 11-minute short released in 1995, and watching it today is a genuinely uncanny experience, because if you know Family Guy even slightly, you will immediately recognize almost everything in it. The short featured a middle-aged, not particularly bright man named Larry Cummings, his patient wife named Lois, and a talking dog named Steve who served as the voice of reason. The film included cutaway gags. It had the same freewheeling energy that Family Guy would later become famous for. The structure, the comedy sensibility, the character dynamics, all of it was there in embryonic form. One specific and wonderful detail about the origins of Peter Griffin's voice. MacFarlane has explained that he based it on a real person. There was a security guard at RISD who worked on campus, a man with a thick Rhode Island accent and an absolute inability to self-edit whatever was on his mind. He said everything at full volume. He had opinions about everything and shared them constantly. In 2013, a local ABC news station in New England actually tracked down this man. His name was Paul Timmons, and he worked as the director of public safety at RISD. When interviewed, he said, openly and without any apparent embarrassment, that he was proud of his contribution to one of television's most recognizable animated characters. He also acknowledged that the character of Peter was, and his exact words here are important, clearly an idiot, but he was proud of it anyway. The Life of Larry caught the attention of animation executives almost immediately. A professor at RISD submitted the film to Hanna-Barbera, the legendary animation studio responsible for the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, and dozens of other foundational American cartoons. The studio hired MacFarlane directly out of school. He was recruited at the RISD Senior Film Festival by two development executives, and he was hired based primarily on the writing quality of the short rather than his pure cartooning ability. He was one of only a small number of people the studio ever hired on the basis of writing talent alone. At Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane worked as a writer and animator on several Cartoon Network series, including Dexter's Laboratory and Johnny Bravo. This experience gave him a practical education in professional animation production that his RISD training had not fully provided. He learned how a real production pipeline worked, how writers' rooms operated, and how to take a concept from a script page to a finished animated sequence. He soaked all of it up. He also described the atmosphere at Hanna-Barbera as having the feeling of an old-fashioned Hollywood structure, where you moved between shows and took whatever job was available, jumping from writing on one show to storyboarding on another. It was not glamorous, but it was enormously educational. During his time at the studio, MacFarlane created a second short film, this one called Larry and Steve. This 1,997 short was a direct continuation of his thesis work, featuring Larry and his talking dog Steve in a story centered more around the dog than the human. The short aired on Cartoon Network as part of their world premiere Toons programming block, a series that had historically been a launching pad for some of Cartoon Network's most beloved original shows. Getting a slot on that block was a significant achievement for a young animator still in his mid-20s. A development executive at Hanna-Barbera who was actively trying to re-establish the studio in the primetime animation space eventually connected MacFarlane with Fox Broadcasting. Fox executives saw both Larry Shorts and responded with genuine enthusiasm. They asked MacFarlane to develop a full television series based on those characters, and they gave him a budget of $50,000 to produce a 15-minute pilot presentation. MacFarlane would later say that the pilot took him approximately 6 months to complete, working at a pace that left very little room for sleep. He did the majority of the work essentially by himself, and the result was something that Fox executives found compelling enough to greenlight into a full series. Fox signed MacFarlane to a production deal in May of 1998, reportedly worth around $2.5 million per year, a staggering figure for someone who had only graduated from art school a few years earlier and whose only produced work was 2 short films and some contribution to Saturday morning cartoons. MacFarlane was, at that point, 24 years old. He was being handed his own primetime television show on one of the 4 major broadcast networks in the United States, which is something that almost never happens in the entertainment industry under any circumstances, let alone for someone that young. He set to work redesigning the characters from the Larry Shorts. Larry became Peter Griffin. The name Peter was likely a nod to the Gilligan's Island character, though Lois reportedly found it acceptable. The dog Steve became Brian Griffin. MacFarlane built an entire family around these 2 core characters, a wife also named Lois, a teenage daughter named Meg, an awkward teenage son named Chris, and then the character who would become perhaps the show's most iconic creation in those early years, a baby named Stewie who spoke like a refined British villain and wanted to kill his mother. The show premiered on the 31st of January 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33 on Fox. That is one of the most valuable time slots in all of American broadcasting. When the Super Bowl ends, tens of millions of people are sitting on their couches with their televisions already tuned to that network, and whatever follows gets a massive audience essentially by default. The first episode of Family Guy, titled Death Has a Shadow, pulled in approximately 22 million viewers. That number is enormous by the standards of any era of television. Even accounting for the Super Bowl inflation, it was a thundering debut. The show was set in a fictional Rhode Island town called Quahog, a name that refers to the type of hard-shelled clam native to the northeastern United States. The entire setting had the feel of a generic New England working-class community, the kind of place where middle-income families went to church on Sunday, drank beer at neighborhood bars, and argued about nothing in particular with the passion of people who had very little else going on. It was, in many ways, a recognizable and relatable world, and the characters who inhabited it were deliberately drawn from archetypes that American audiences would immediately understand. Peter Griffin worked at a toy factory called the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory in the first few seasons, before later transitioning to a job at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, which became one of the show's more durable setting fixtures. He was overweight, not particularly intelligent, prone to impulsive behavior, and deeply fond of beer and television. Lois was his wife, a former piano teacher and stay-at-home mother from a wealthy New England family. Her parents, Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt, represented the upper-class world she had deliberately walked away from when she chose to marry Peter. Meg was the eldest child, a normal high school teenager dealing with the universal indignities of adolescence. Chris was the son, awkward and well-meaning, bearing a strong physical resemblance to his father while being somewhat less aggressively awful. Stewie was the baby, a 1-year-old who had somehow developed an advanced intellect and an absolute obsession with world domination and matricide. And Brian was the family dog, a walking, talking, martini-drinking, novelist-aspiring Labrador retriever who served as the show's moral center and intellectual conscience. The show's first season ranked number 33 in the overall Nielsen ratings for that year, averaging 12.8 million households tuning in each week. For a brand new animated series airing on Sunday nights in a competitive landscape, those were genuinely strong numbers, enough to suggest that Family Guy had found a real audience. Then Fox started moving it around. During the second season, Fox shifted Family Guy to Thursday nights at 9 p.m., placing it in direct competition with Frasier on NBC. Frasier was one of the most popular comedies on television at the time, beloved by critics and audiences alike, and Family Guy was not remotely prepared to compete with it for that same audience. Ratings dropped. Fox then moved the show to Tuesday nights, where it ran against Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on ABC, which was at that point one of the dominant forces on American television. More ratings dropped. The constant schedule shuffling made it nearly impossible for casual viewers to find the show, and the audience that had shown up for the Super Bowl premiere began to scatter. Fox canceled Family Guy after its third season in the summer of 2002. The cancellation looked permanent. The show left the air with one episode still unaired, an episode called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, that Fox had already pulled from the broadcast schedule over concerns about its content. It seemed at the time like that was the end of the story. It was not the end of the story. If you're listening to this right now and you're settling in for a long session, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing where people are tuning in from, and if you haven't already, subscribing takes about 2 seconds and it genuinely makes a difference. Now, back to the facts. Number, Section 2. The Griffin family characters, voices, and hidden details. The voice cast of Family Guy is one of the most remarkable assemblages of talent in the history of animated television, and the stories behind how those people ended up in those roles are genuinely interesting. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of the show's principal characters: Peter Griffin, Stewie Griffin, Brian Griffin, and Glenn Quagmire. The fact that one man provides the voices for all 4 of those characters, each of whom sounds distinctly different from the others, is an achievement in voice acting that rarely gets the recognition it deserves. In the recording booth, MacFarlane regularly switches between these 4 voices within a single session, sometimes within a single scene. Writers on the show have said that watching MacFarlane record lines for episodes where multiple characters he voices appear in the same scene requires him to essentially perform a rapid internal context switch, dropping one character completely and inhabiting another within the space of a second or two. He makes it look effortless. Peter's voice, as mentioned earlier, was based on a real RISD security guard named Paul Timmons. The accent is thick Rhode Island, with a particular quality of speaking at full volume, regardless of whether full volume is appropriate, and an absolute absence of internal filtering between thought and speech. MacFarlane has described it as a voice where the person saying the words never once questions whether they should be saying them. Stewie's voice is a different kind of achievement entirely. MacFarlane has explained that he developed Stewie's voice as a falsetto impression inspired by Rex Harrison's performance in the 1964 musical film My Fair Lady. Rex Harrison played Professor Henry Higgins, a posh British linguist, and the particular upper-class English diction Harrison employed in that film was something MacFarlane found inherently amusing. He adapted that quality, pitched it into the higher register appropriate for an infant, and added the layer of menacing calm that made Stewie sound like a tiny Bond villain. MacFarlane described the character to interviewers as an evil Rex Harrison, which is about as precise a description of Stewie's voice as you could ask for. There is a fascinating canonical wrinkle to Stewie's accent that the show eventually addressed directly. In the Season 10 episode Send in Stewie, Please, Stewie spends an extended period of time in conversation with a child psychologist voiced by Sir Ian McKellen. During this session, Stewie reveals that his British accent is not real. It is an affectation, a construction. He explains that everything about him is a carefully built persona designed to keep people at a distance, and that the accent is simply a coat of armor. When he drops it, his real voice sounds like a higher-pitched version of Brian's voice, which is itself a higher-pitched version of MacFarlane's natural speaking voice. The character had been performing a version of himself for the entire run of the show, and the writers finally made that explicit. Brian's voice is the closest of MacFarlane's 4 principal voices to his own natural speaking voice. It has a dry, measured quality, the voice of someone who considers himself the most sensible person in the room and is constantly having that belief tested. MacFarlane has said he conceived Brian as something of a self-insert character, a version of himself living inside the world of the show and reacting to it with the exasperation he himself would feel. This makes Brian's later character evolution, in which the character becomes increasingly insufferable and self-satisfied, something of a complicated authorial statement. Quagmire's voice is deliberately positioned at the opposite end of the spectrum from Brian, broad and theatrical where Brian is understated, leaning into a kind of retro bachelor pad sleaze that evokes a specific era of American masculinity. MacFarlane has described the character's voice as being influenced by mid-century lounge culture, a kind of post-war American machismo that had already become a parody of itself by the time the show depicted it. Alex Borstein voices Lois Griffin, and she has been doing so since the very beginning. The story of how she came to be cast is one of the more entertaining pieces of Family Guy trivia in existence. Borstein was working on the sketch comedy series MAD-TV at the time, and she was connected to the Family Guy project through a development executive who was simultaneously working with MacFarlane. She had performed a character in a stage show in Los Angeles, a red-headed mother whose voice she had based on one of her cousins from Long Island. That voice became the foundation for Lois. When she first performed it in the booth, MacFarlane told her to make it slightly less annoying and to speed it up, adding that if she kept the original tempo, every episode would last 4 hours. She adjusted, and the rest is animation history. What makes Borstein's story particularly interesting is that Fox nearly fired her before the show even properly launched. She had to re-audition for the role of Lois when Fox executives pushed back against her casting as the show moved from the pilot phase to full series production. Borstein went through that process alongside, as she later described it at the 2006 Paley Festival, what felt like every actress in Hollywood who had ever stepped off a bus. She kept the job. Fox's reservations did not prevail. Meg Griffin was voiced in the first season by Lacey Chabert, who was known at the time for her role in Party of Five. Chabert left the role after the first season, and the circumstances of her departure have been described differently depending on who is telling the story. Chabert has said she left of her own accord. The transition happened during the second production season, and Alex Borstein temporarily stepped in to voice Meg at table reads while the show looked for a replacement. Then, starting with the episode Let's Go to the Hop, Mila Kunis took over the role and has played Meg ever since. Mila Kunis was 15 years old when she first auditioned for the role of Meg. During the audition, the producers asked her age, and she reportedly told them that she would be 18, without specifying that she would not be 18 immediately, but rather at some unspecified point in the future. The answer was technically true in the same way that any statement about someone eventually reaching a particular age is technically true. She got the job. Seth Green, who voices Chris Griffin, came to his audition for the role with a very specific and somewhat unusual choice. According to a story shared by Green himself and referenced in several behind-the-scenes accounts, a friend dared him to audition for the role of Chris Griffin using his best impression of Buffalo Bill, the serial killer character from The Silence of the Lambs. Green took the dare seriously enough to actually attempt it in the booth. The result was a voice that, while clearly not a direct impression of a fictional murderer, had an unusual quality that landed somewhere interesting. That voice became Chris, and it has been there ever since. Patrick Warburton plays Joe Swanson, the wheelchair-using police officer who lives next door to the Griffins. Warburton is one of those voice actors whose voice is so naturally distinctive that it creates an immediate character regardless of what he is actually saying. Deep, resonant, with a slightly self-important edge that plays beautifully against the absurdity of the situations Joe regularly finds himself in. Warburton has also played David Puddy on Seinfeld, the Tick in the live-action version of that series, and Kronk in The Emperor's New Groove, which means he has one of the more eclectic resumes in comedy. Jennifer Tilly voiced Bonnie Swanson, Joe's wife, for many seasons. Bonnie was perpetually pregnant for a significant portion of the show's run, a running gag that stretched the boundaries of biological plausibility to the point where the writers eventually had to address it. She gave birth in season 7, after 7 seasons of pregnancy, which placed the gestation period somewhere around 7 years. Adam West, the actor who played Batman in the 1966 television series, played the mayor of Quahog named Mayor Adam West for years, until his death in June of 2017. The character was a self-parody, an absurdist version of West's own public image, and West embraced it completely. He was apparently delighted by the role and by the freedom the show gave him to be as strange as the material required. The character continued to appear in the show after West's passing, voiced by other actors in a way that the show handled with some care. The Griffin family has a recurring cast of neighbors and friends who form the backbone of Quahog's social landscape. Quagmire lives next door and serves as Peter's most morally flexible friend, a man whose worldview is built almost entirely around the pursuit of women and the avoidance of consequences. Cleveland Brown, before he eventually got his own spin-off series, was another of Peter's core group of friends, a gentle and soft-spoken man whose fundamental decency stood in pleasant contrast to the chaos around him. The character of Herbert, the elderly neighbor who lives across the street and harbors unsettling feelings toward Chris, was voiced by Mike Henry. Herbert became one of the show's recurring characters over time, and while the comedic premise he represents is deeply uncomfortable in isolation, he became part of the show's established texture in a way that divided critics fairly evenly. He was nominated in a TV guide list of the 100 greatest TV characters, which tells you something about how the show's particular brand of transgressive humor lands for different audiences. Lois Griffin has a wealthy New England background that the show mines consistently for comedy. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is voiced by MacFarlane in a voice that sounds like a man accustomed to dismissing anyone who earns less than he does, which is essentially everyone. Carter is one of those characters who is allowed to be genuinely monstrous in a way that the show treats as self-evident comedy. He has done things across the series that would be disqualifying for any real person, but the show wraps them in such elaborate absurdity that the moral horror sort of slides past you if you are not paying close attention. One of the Griffin family's most consistent background details is the layout of their house. The Griffin home at 31 Spooner Street has a specific interior arrangement that the show maintains with reasonable consistency, at least in its earlier seasons. The living room, the kitchen, the staircase going up to the bedrooms, these spaces feel lived in and specific, in a way that good sitcom set design always does. The house has a yellowish exterior and a distinctly working-class New England domestic aesthetic. It sits in a neighborhood full of similar houses, which creates the impression of a community even before you have met any of the neighbors. Meg's room is consistently portrayed as being at the end of a hallway on the second floor, slightly removed from the rest of the family. It is decorated in a way that suggests a teenager trying very hard to express herself and not quite landing anywhere distinctive. Chris's room is a chaos of adolescent interests, posters, sports equipment, the general disorder of a teenage boy who has not yet developed a system for organizing anything. Stewie's room, in the early seasons especially, is an absolute marvel of hidden engineering, containing armories, sophisticated laboratories, and technology that should not be physically possible to conceal within the walls of a suburban bedroom. Brian's space in the house is somewhat ambiguous. He is the family dog, after all, and the show is inconsistent about whether he has his own dedicated room or simply occupies whatever space is convenient. He is regularly shown at the bar, at the kitchen table, in the living room, driving the family car, seated at writing desks, and carrying martinis with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing it for years. One small detail about the show's opening title sequence, the theme song, Family Guy Theme, formerly titled Theme from Family Guy, was composed by Walter Murphy, who has served as the show's primary composer throughout its run. Murphy also wrote the score for most Family Guy episodes, and his musical sensibility is a significant but often overlooked part of the show's overall texture. The opening sequence changes slightly from season to season, incorporating references to current events, guest appearances from that season, or visual jokes that reward close attention. Regular viewers have cataloged dozens of variations across the show's long run. Walter Murphy has said that Seth MacFarlane is committed to using a live orchestra for the show's musical scoring, rather than synthesized or pre-recorded instrumentation. This is an unusual choice for an animated television series, where budget considerations typically push productions toward digital sound design, and it is part of what gives Family Guy its particular musical warmth in contrast to the chaos happening on screen. Number, Section 3. The Golden Era Seasons 1, 2, and 3. The first 3 seasons of Family Guy are, by near universal agreement among people who have watched the show from the beginning, the standard against which everything that came later gets measured. Understanding what made those seasons work is essential to understanding not just the show's early greatness, but also the way those qualities gradually changed over time. In the first season, the writing staff that MacFarlane assembled included Chris Sheridan, Danny Smith, Gary Janetti, Ricky Blitt, Neil Goldman, Garrett Donovan, Matt Weitzman, and Mike Barker. These writers collectively shaped the specific comic voice of those early episodes, a voice that balanced sharp cultural observation with genuine character warmth in a way that was harder to achieve than it appeared. The first episode to air, Death Has a Shadow, established the show's territory with remarkable confidence for a pilot. Peter gets fired from his toy factory job, fraudulently collects unemployment benefits, and eventually has to be rescued from the consequences of his actions by his family. The episode has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Characters behave in recognizable ways. The cutaways are present but brief, and they work as seasoning on top of a coherent plot rather than as the primary delivery mechanism for comedy. It is a genuinely good piece of television. The Season 1 episode Mind Over Murder contains a moment that many longtime fans point to as an early indicator of the show's ability to find genuine emotion within its absurdist framework. Peter, having somehow built a bar in his basement, and Lois, who has been prevented from doing anything she wants to do because of Peter's various schemes, reach a point of real conflict that the episode takes seriously before resolving it. The show was willing, in those early seasons, to have its main characters feel things that were recognizable as human emotions. Season 2 introduced a number of characters and dynamics that would become core parts of the show's DNA. The episode Running Mates gave Lois a prominent storyline in which she ran for school board and found herself in conflict with Peter's oblivious interference. It was an episode about a married couple whose personalities were genuinely incompatible in specific ways, and it worked because the show understood both of them well enough to generate that conflict honestly. Season 2 also includes Road to Rhode Island, the first of the show's Road to episodes, which would become one of its most reliable episodic formats. In this episode, Brian and Stewie travel cross-country together after Brian is tasked with collecting Stewie from his grandparents' home in Palm Springs. The episode featured the first of many musical sequences that the show would develop into a signature element, with Brian and Stewie performing a song that referenced Bing Crosby and Bob Hope's classic road movies. The song was sharp, the performances were committed, and the episode demonstrated that the show could do something genuinely creative with its two most distinctive characters when it put them together. Road to Rhode Island also contains one of the more unexpectedly poignant moments in the show's early run. Brian visits the farm where he was born, and the scene in which he discovers that his mother has died and has become part of a piece of furniture is played with a strange mixture of black comedy and genuine grief that lands differently than you expect it to. The show was willing to let Brian feel something real in that moment, and the result was more affecting than the premise had any right to be. Season 3 brought the show into its most confident and fully realized phase before the cancellation. The Thin White Line and Brian Does Hollywood opened the season with a two-parter that gave Brian a significant storyline, sending him through drug addiction and a stint in the pornography industry. The show handled the drug addiction story with more care than you might expect, using it to illuminate Brian's underlying dissatisfaction with his life rather than simply playing it for laughs. The Season 3 episode Stuck Together, Torn Apart focused on Peter and Lois separating briefly and then reconciling. And it worked, because the show understood that these two people loved each other even when they were making each other miserable. That understanding the fundamental affection at the heart of the Griffin marriage was what made so much of the early show's domestic comedy land. It was not cynical. It believed in the relationship even when it was depicting the relationship at its most strained. Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows is worth discussing in detail, because it won the show an Emmy Award for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. The episode featured a storyline in which Brian develops a romantic connection with an elderly recluse named Pearl, a woman who had been a promising singer before withdrawing from the world entirely. The episode contained several musical sequences, including a sequence in which Pearl sings, and the production quality of those sequences was genuinely impressive. The director of the episode was Dan Povenmire, who would later become famous as the co-creator of Phineas and Ferb, and he has noted with gentle humor that MacFarlane received the Emmy Award for the episode, while privately acknowledging that the director's visual contribution was what made the music work. The Season 3 episode Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother, addressed the topic of slavery in American history through Peter's discovery of his own family history, and it was the kind of episode that demonstrated the show's early ambition to take on subjects with genuine social weight. Whether you think it succeeded or failed, it was attempting something. The show was willing to reach in those first 3 seasons in ways it would become less willing to do later. The giant chicken is introduced in Season 2 in an episode called Da Boom. The chicken, whose name is Ernie, a detail that many viewers never learned, is a character who gives Peter a bad coupon, and Peter's reaction to this minor transgression is to begin an extended physical fight with the chicken that destroys vast amounts of property and causes serious collateral damage to the surrounding area. The fight ends. Both characters return to their lives. And then, periodically throughout the series, the chicken reappears and the cycle of destruction begins again. The giant chicken fights became one of the show's most beloved recurring devices, beloved precisely because they were so committed, so extended, and so completely free of any purpose or narrative justification. The first giant chicken fight was animated with a level of detail and physical specificity that surprised viewers who were accustomed to cartoon violence being abstract and consequence-free. The damage was real, within the logic of the show. Buildings crumbled. Peter and the chicken fell from great heights. The fight moved through multiple environments, each of which was left considerably worse off than it had been before the combatants arrived. And then it ended, and the show moved on as if nothing had happened. Season 3 also produced the first version of Stewie's world domination plots at their most elaborate. Throughout the first 3 seasons, Stewie's schemes involved real engineering and real planning. He built actual weapons. He constructed machines with specific functions. He thought strategically about how to achieve his goals. The humor came from the fact that an infant was capable of this level of planning, and from the absurdity of what those goals actually were. Taking over the world and killing Lois are not objectives that a normal person pursues. The comedy of Stewie in those early seasons was the collision between his sophisticated methodology and his impossible objective. One of the most consistently discussed aspects of the early seasons is the way they handled the question of who could understand Stewie. In the earliest episodes, the adults could not hear Stewie as the audience heard him. They registered his speech as babbling, or simply ignored him. Brian was the exception. He understood Stewie, which is part of why their relationship developed the way it did. The show was never entirely consistent about this rule, and it gradually abandoned it as the seasons progressed, but in the first season especially, the dramatic irony of Stewie delivering elaborate monologues to a room full of people who could not process them was a constant source of comedy. The show's cultural references in the first 3 seasons were deliberately eclectic and wide-ranging. MacFarlane and his writing team pulled from classic Hollywood cinema, 70s and 80s television, musical theater, opera, literature, and current events with equal enthusiasm. The references were often unexpected, juxtaposing high and low culture in ways that gave the show a particular intellectual energy even when the jokes themselves were crude. You might get a cutaway referencing a Noel Coward play immediately followed by a fart joke. The contrast was not accidental. One of the more remarkable pieces of trivia from the first 3 seasons involves a very specific episode in the original run. The episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, which was pulled from Fox's broadcast schedule in 2000 over concerns about its depiction of Jewish stereotypes, eventually aired on Adult Swim in 2003. The episode features Peter trying to solve his family's financial problems by finding a Jewish financial advisor, based on his belief in a stereotype about Jewish people and money. MacFarlane maintained that the episode was a satire of anti-Semitism rather than an expression of it, and the eventual critical response was largely supportive of that reading. The episode features a parody of a song from An American Tail, which is itself a film about Jewish immigration to America, as a deliberate additional layer of cultural commentary. Seth Green's audition for Chris using a Buffalo Bill impression deserves elaboration. Green has confirmed this story in interviews, and there is something wonderfully absurd about the fact that one of Family Guy's main characters has a voice that can trace its origins to a dare. Green was young enough at the time of his casting to find the dare worth accepting, and experienced enough as an actor to make something genuinely workable out of it. The result is a voice that sounds entirely natural for Chris Big, slightly uncertain, with the particular quality of someone who is always one beat behind the conversation while having this deeply strange origin story attached to it. The animaton of the first season was handled primarily by 2 studios, Grimsame and Sunwoo Digital, both South Korean animation houses. The result had a rougher, more hand-drawn quality than the show would develop in later seasons, with character movements that felt slightly less smooth but also more energetic. There is a looseness to the first season's animation that many longtime fans look back on with genuine affection. It has the quality of something made by people who were still figuring it out as they went, which is itself a kind of charm. Number Section 4. Cancellation, Adult Swim, and the Miraculous Revival. The story of how Family Guy came back from cancellation is genuinely one of the most remarkable events in the history of American television, and it is worth telling slowly. When Fox canceled the show in 2002, the network was not sentimental about it. The ratings had dropped. The show had been shuffled through so many different time slots that the audience had trouble keeping track of when it was actually on. And Fox at the time had other priorities. The cancellation was announced, and the industry moved on. The assumption was that Family Guy had had its run, and that was the end of it. One episode was left unaired, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, the episode Fox had pulled from the schedule in 2000 and never gotten around to actually broadcasting. This episode would eventually get its premiere on Adult Swim. Cartoon Network acquired the rights to air Family Guy reruns for a remarkably small sum. The network had purchased the rights cheaply, precisely because nobody thought the show had significant commercial value anymore. A cancelled animated series with questionable ratings history was not a premium property. Cartoon Network got those rights for what has been described as almost nothing in multiple accounts of the deal. The reruns premiered on Adult Swim on the 20th of April 2003, and then something happened that nobody had predicted. Family Guy became the highest-rated program on the entire Adult Swim block, immediately and dramatically. Not gradually. Not after a warm-up period. Immediately. The show dominated late-night viewing in its time slot against both cable and broadcast competition, and it boosted Adult Swim's overall viewership by 239%. That is an almost incomprehensible improvement for any programming move. The timing of the Adult Swim reruns was not incidental to their success. The audience that had loved Family Guy during its original run was still out there. They had not stopped caring about the show. They had simply been unable to keep up with it during its original run, because Fox kept moving it and then eventually took it away entirely. When Adult Swim gave them a reliable, consistent place to find it, they showed up. At the same time, the DVD releases of Family Guy's first and second seasons hit shelves in the same week that the Adult Swim reruns began. This was a coincidence of timing that had enormous consequences. The DVD set sold 400,000 copies within the first month. Eventually, total sales of the first and second season set reached 2.2 million copies, making it the best-selling television DVD of 2003. For context, the only TV DVD to outsell it to that point was the first season of Chappelle's Show on Comedy Central. The third season DVD release also sold over 1 million copies. A canceled show was generating DVD sales that the television industry had never seen for any program in similar circumstances. The numbers told Fox a story that was impossible to argue with. There was an audience for Family Guy, and that audience was passionate, loyal, and willing to spend money. Fox, which had canceled the show twice and let the rights go for minimal compensation, began to reconsider its position. By 2004, the network announced that it was ordering new episodes. A fourth season of Family Guy was greenlit, and it was set to air in 2005. The fan response to this announcement was extraordinary. The revival of a canceled show through fan demand and DVD sales was not something that had really happened before at this scale and speed. Industry observers at the time noted that Family Guy had effectively pioneered a new model for how a canceled show might return. The combination of a passionate existing audience, a new platform for discovery, and a physical media product that fans could own and share had created something unprecedented. Family Guy was, by the accounts of several entertainment journalists covering the story at the time, the first series to be formally brought back from cancellation based primarily on syndication ratings and home video sales. MacFarlane himself had used the years between the cancellation and the revival productively. He had been developing American Dad, which was created alongside Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman, two writers from Family Guy's original run. American Dad premiered on the 6th of February 2005 on Fox a few months before Family Guy's return, giving MacFarlane a second animated series in primetime at the same network simultaneously. That is a genuinely unusual achievement for anyone in the television business. The fourth season of Family Guy premiered on the 1st of May 2005, and Fox placed it within a rebuilt Sunday night animation lineup called Animation Domination. The block featured The Simpsons, King of the Hill, American Dad, and Family Guy airing back-to-back. It was a serious commitment of primetime real estate to animated programming, and Family Guy was the centerpiece of the argument that adult animation could anchor a network's most competitive night. The return drew strong numbers. The fans who had bought the DVDs and watched the reruns showed up in large numbers for the new episodes, and the hype around the revival translated into genuine ratings success in the short term. One small detail about the Adult Swim era that often gets overlooked: the unaired episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein received its official premiere not on Fox but on Adult Swim. In 2003, the episode had been sitting in a vault for 3 years while Fox decided what to do with it, and it was ultimately Adult Swim that gave it an audience first. This is a genuinely peculiar piece of broadcasting history. An episode of a show aired for the first time on a network other than the one that produced it, after the show itself had been canceled. The revival also changed the way that entertainment executives thought about the relationship between network television, cable reruns, and home video. If Family Guy could be resurrected by this combination of forces, what other canceled shows might be candidates for similar treatment? The industry began to look differently at shows that had died with passionate fan bases, and the concept of the fan-driven revival became a template that other series would attempt to follow in subsequent years, with varying degrees of success. One of the more poignant aspects of the whole story is the 3-year gap between the cancellation and the revival. During those 3 years, the show's original writing staff had scattered. Writers had moved to other projects. Some had developed their own shows. Some had moved into film writing. The tight community of people who had built Family Guy's specific voice together had been dispersed by necessity, and when the show came back, it came back with a different room. MacFarlane himself acknowledged this directly in later interviews, noting that one of the persistent effects of the show being repeatedly canceled and revived was that they were always having to restaff the writing team. The people who made the first 3 seasons were not the same people who made the 4th and 5th, and the show that emerged from the revival was recognizably Family Guy, but also subtly different, in ways that would only become more pronounced as the seasons continued. The Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story direct-to-video movie was released in September 2005, edited together from 3 episodes that had been produced for Season 4. The film was notable for depicting a more emotionally vulnerable version of Stewie than had been seen in the series, and it included content that the broadcast version of the show could not air due to network standards. It sold well and was received warmly by fans, and it served as a kind of proof of concept that Family Guy could work as a feature-length project. Number. Section 5. The writing room process, personalities, and creative decisions. Understanding how Family Guy gets made requires understanding how its writing room operates, and the picture that emerges from various behind-the-scenes accounts is both fascinating and illuminating. The show follows a fairly standard process for a primetime animated series. Writers pitch episode concepts, and the ones that get approved move through a development process that involves multiple drafts and table reads before reaching production. Because animated shows have long production lead times, episodes can take anywhere from 6 months to a year to get from script to screen. The writing room is often working on content that will not air for many months, which requires a specific kind of long-term planning. MacFarlane, during the years when he was most deeply involved in the show, was known for being highly involved at every stage of the process, including the recording sessions. He voiced 4 principal characters, which meant that he was in the recording booth for essentially every episode anyway. His presence created a natural quality control mechanism. He could flag things in the booth that were not landing the way they were supposed to land on paper, and he could redirect performances or lines in real time. The writing staff over the years has included some genuinely notable figures. Alex Sulkin, who served as showrunner in later seasons, had been on the show since its revival and developed a reputation for being willing to take the show's humor to its most extreme places. Mark Henteman was a long-running staff member who became a showrunner as well. Steve Callahan, who served as executive producer, has been credited in multiple accounts with helping to maintain the show's visual identity during production. Cherry Chevapravat Dumrong became one of the more prominent writers on the show in its later seasons, and was among those credited with the shift away from the most extreme treatment of Meg Griffin. Her presence on the writing staff, along with other female writers who joined in later seasons, has been cited by multiple observers as directly connected to improvements in how the show handled its female characters. The show's treatment of Meg, while still far from perfect in any accounting, became noticeably less vicious after the writing room became more gender-balanced. The show has made regular use of writers pulling double duty as voice actors in supporting roles. Alex Sulkin voices Jesus Christ in several episodes. Danny Smith, who voices Ernie the Giant Chicken, the actual giant chicken who keeps fighting Peter, has also played television announcers and various background characters. This practice of using writing staff as voice talent for supporting roles is common in animated television, partly for budgetary reasons and partly because the writers already understand the show's rhythms and can deliver the performances with appropriate timing. The cutaway gag format, which has been discussed extensively in broader conversations about the show, has its own behind-the-scenes logic. Writers pitch cutaway gags separately from episode storylines, and the most successful cutaways in any given season often have nothing to do with the episode they appear in thematically. They are jokes that fit a particular setup line and could theoretically appear in any episode. The portability of the format is one of its great strengths, and also, as critics have noted, one of its structural weaknesses in later seasons. One of the most distinctive elements of Family Guy's writing process is the show's approach to celebrity guest appearances. Unlike some animated shows that simply have celebrities voice exaggerated versions of themselves, Family Guy has often integrated guest performers into specific character roles, giving them actual characters to play rather than just requiring them to be recognizable. Robert Downey Jr. voiced Lois's brother Patrick Pewterschmidt in the episode The Fat Guy Strangler. Cate Blanchett voiced a recurring antagonist for Stewie named Penelope. These were not cameo appearances, but actual performances. The show has also featured celebrities playing themselves in ways that required a specific kind of good humor. Drew Barrymore appeared in an episode. James Woods appeared as a version of himself who became a recurring character. Adam West played himself as the mayor of the show's fictional town, a role that required him to be an amiable parody of his own most famous persona for years. These relationships between the show and its celebrity participants required a degree of mutual comfort with absurdity that not every performer possesses. The 2007 Writers Guild of America strike had a significant impact on Family Guy's production, as it did on virtually every scripted television show of the era. The strike began in November of 2007 and lasted until the 12th of February, 2008, a period of roughly 3 months during which the writing staff was on the picket line rather than in the writer's room. MacFarlane was a prominent supporter of the strike, joining the picket lines and making public statements in support of the writers' demands. He had also been a supporter of the writers during a previous work action. During the strike, Fox made a controversial decision to air 3 episodes of Family Guy that had already been completed before the work stoppage. MacFarlane was not pleased with this. These episodes had been produced before the strike, so Fox technically had the legal right to broadcast them, but airing them without MacFarlane's blessing created a strain in the creator's relationship with the network that many observers cite as an early manifestation of the tension that would only grow worse in subsequent years. When the strike ended, production resumed, but the interruption had broken the rhythm of the season in ways that were difficult to fully repair. Television writing has a flow to it, ideas build on each other, revisions respond to earlier revisions. The room develops a collective momentum that is hard to recreate after a multi-month pause. Several writers have reflected on how the post-strike periods in their careers required a kind of creative rewarming that took time they did not always have. The show has had multiple different showrunners across its run, each of whom brought different priorities to the creative process. David Zuckerman served as showrunner in the early seasons and helped establish the baseline tone. Daniel Palladino was involved in the show's development. David Goodman was showrunner during the revival seasons. Chris Sheridan, who was part of the original writing staff, also cycled through showrunning duties. Richard Apple and Alex Sulkin eventually took over as the most prominent voices in the show's day-to-day creative management. The show's writing room has been described by various participants as an environment that rewards fearlessness. There is a culture of pitching the most extreme version of any idea and then deciding how far back from that extreme to pull, rather than pitching safe ideas and trying to push them further. This approach generates a lot of material that never makes it to screen, but also creates space for the jokes that do make it through to be genuinely surprising. The show has revisited and referenced its own history with increasing frequency as it has aged. Characters will occasionally acknowledge events from previous seasons. Storylines will pick up threads that were established years earlier. The show does not maintain a strict continuity. It operates on what television writers call a floating timeline, where characters do not age and specific events are not necessarily binding on future episodes, but it does have a memory, and writers have sometimes exploited that memory in clever ways. Number Section 6. Stewie Griffin. The complete deep dive. Stewie Griffin is, in the opinion of a significant number of people who have engaged seriously with Family Guy, the show's single greatest creative achievement. His character in the first 3 seasons represents something genuinely original in the history of animated comedy, and the story of how that character evolved and what was gained and lost in that evolution is one of the most interesting character studies in the medium. The conception of Stewie began with a design challenge. MacFarlane wanted a baby in the Griffin family, and he wanted that baby to be a character rather than simply a prop or a vehicle for cute baby jokes. The design he arrived at was deliberately distinctive: an enormous football-shaped head, a small round body, a tiny diaper, and a yellow shirt. The head shape is a deliberate exaggeration. Babies' heads are proportionally large relative to their bodies, and the football shape takes that biological reality and amplifies it into something that reads as immediately cartoonish and slightly unsettling. There is something about the shape that prevents Stewie from being conventionally cute in the way that animated babies typically are. McFarlane has described the inspiration for Stewie's personality in very specific terms. He wanted a character who represented the id of the most extreme possible infant experience. A creature without genuine social conditioning, without empathy, without concern for any agenda other than his own. What would a baby actually want if babies could articulate what they wanted? McFarlane's answer was that they would want to eliminate the people who controlled them and assert dominion over everything around them. Stewie's desire to kill Lois is, in this reading, a darkly comic extrapolation of the very real psychological experience of infantile dependency, the baby who cannot do anything for himself, resenting with absolute passion the person who has total power over him. The voice, as established earlier, was built on Rex Harrison's Professor Higgins from My Fair Lady. McFarlane has said that Harrison's particular quality of speaking, measured, precise, utterly confident in its own superiority, was what he was reaching for. The result was a voice that sounded like someone who had spent decades in rarefied company and was disappointed to find themselves surrounded by lesser beings, delivered from the body of a 1-year-old in a diaper. In the first season, Stewie's equipment included a ray gun that he built himself, a mind control helmet, and a time machine. The time machine became one of the show's most durable props, a device that Stewie would use and return to across many different seasons and storylines. In the early episodes, the time machine was specifically a tool of his larger ambitions. He wanted to conquer the present. But the time machine gave him access to past and future as well. The scope of his plans was genuinely ambitious. The relationship between Stewie and his teddy bear Rupert is one of the show's most endearing, recurring elements. Stewie treats Rupert as his closest confidant, speaking to him privately, sharing plans with him, and displaying a genuine tenderness in their interactions that the character does not extend to most humans. Rupert was, in the early seasons, one of the clearest windows into Stewie's interior emotional life. Even a baby who wants to take over the world needs something to love, and Stewie loves his bear. The dynamic between Stewie and Brian began developing in the first season and accelerated in the second and third. Brian was, as established, one of the only characters who could understand Stewie, which made him Stewie's most functional conversational partner. Their exchanges in those early seasons had a particular quality. Brian would respond to Stewie's plans with a weary acknowledgement that the plans were in fact plans, rather than dismissing them the way the other characters did. He took Stewie seriously, which Stewie appreciated, and Stewie's intelligence made him an interesting conversational partner for Brian, who was otherwise surrounded by people less capable of engaging with him at his level. The Road to episode format, which began with Road to Rhode Island in Season 2, became the primary vehicle for the Brian and Stewie relationship as the show progressed. These episodes, which riffed on the classic Bing Crosby and Bob Hope road pictures from the 1940s, sent the two characters on adventures that took them far away from Quahog. Road to Europe, Road to Rupert, Road to Germany, Road to the Multiverse, Road to the North Pole, Road to India, Road to Vegas. The format proved remarkably flexible, and each installment found new variations on the central dynamic of a pompous, intellectually sharp baby and a cynical, alcoholic dog trying to accomplish something improbable together. Road to the Multiverse, which aired in Season 8, is often cited by fans as one of the last truly great Family Guy episodes, a piece of work that demonstrated the creative possibilities of the show's central premise at their most inventive. The episode imagines a version of the multiverse in which different universes have different visual styles, and Stewie and Brian travel between them. One universe is animated in the style of Walt Disney's classic feature films. One universe is animated in a crudely simple style. One universe is a live-action universe, which is depicted through a clever formal trick. The episode required the animation department to produce multiple, completely different visual styles in a single episode, and the results were impressive enough to generate genuine critical attention. The Season 6 two-parter Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie is one of the most ambitious things the show ever attempted. In the first episode, Stewie finally achieves his long-stated goal. He apparently kills Lois, who disappears at sea. In the second episode, Lois returns, reveals she survived, and the confrontation between mother and son escalates into something epic. Stewie takes over the world. He achieves everything he always said he would achieve. And then the twist arrives. The entire sequence of events was a computer simulation on Stewie's laptop. None of it actually happened. This twist has been interpreted in multiple ways over the years. On one reading, it is a clever meta-commentary on the show's relationship with consequence. A show that resets every week can simulate consequences without ever actually imposing them. On another reading, it is an admission of creative paralysis, a show that wanted to tell a big story but could not bring itself to actually change anything. The writers wanted to explore what evil Stewie at his most extreme would look like without having to deal with the implications of that exploration. The simulation framing let them have it both ways. After those episodes, the evil genius version of Stewie began to fade. The world domination plots became rarer. The attempts to kill Lois slowed to a near-complete stop. Stewie's character shifted toward a more emotionally complex figure, someone who was still quick-witted and capable of malice, but whose storylines were increasingly about personal identity, friendship, and vulnerability rather than global conquest. He started cross-dressing regularly. He became more openly affectionate. He developed anxiety and insecurity that the earlier version of the character had not displayed. In the episode Send in Stewie, Please, which is something of a bottle episode in which Stewie spends the majority of the runtime in conversation with a therapist, the show did the most thorough character examination of Stewie it had ever attempted. Over the course of that episode, Stewie reveals things about himself that contextualize his entire history. The accent is fake, the persona is armor, the bravado conceals a deep need for acceptance and love. It is a genuinely well-written episode, and it demonstrates that the writers understood Stewie at a level of depth that the show did not always bring to its characters. Whether the new Stewie is better or worse than the old Stewie is a question that depends entirely on what you value. The early Stewie was more original, there was nothing else like him in animation. The later Stewie was more emotionally complex. He had depths that the evil genius character simply could not reach. What the show gained in one direction, it gave up in another. One specific fact about Stewie that surprises many casual viewers. When Stewie was introduced in the pilot episode, he was literally 0 years old. He had been born less than 4 months before the events of the first episode. His first birthday occurs in the Season 1 episode, Chitty Chitty Death Bang, which involves Stewie becoming convinced that his birthday party is actually a cover for Lois, bringing in the man from the sky, a personification of the deity who first gave Stewie life to take him back. The episode is an early example of how Stewie's villain perspective applied even to things that should be innocent, like birthday parties. The Penelope character, introduced in Season 10, was a fascinating attempt to give Stewie a villain counterpart, another baby genius with dangerous capabilities and a similarly menacing personality. Voiced by Cate Blanchett, Penelope was designed as someone who could match Stewie intellectually and emotionally, and the episodes featuring her were among the more interesting Stewie-centric content of the show's middle period. The character did not return frequently enough to develop into a long-term fixture, but her appearances were notable. Section 7. Brian Griffin. Full character breakdown. Brian Griffin's arc across the full run of Family Guy is, in many ways, the most instructive character study the show offers. He begins as arguably the most nuanced and sympathetic character on the show, and he ends up being the character most frequently cited by long-term fans as having been most badly damaged by the writer's later choices. Brian is a Labrador Retriever. He is 8 years old in the first episode, which, in dog years, places him somewhere in his mid-50s, an age that aligns neatly with his temperament. He is the kind of dog who drinks martinis, not beer. He aspires to be taken seriously as a literary figure. He keeps a manuscript of a novel in a desk drawer and has been working on it for years. He is deeply fond of women and persistently unlucky in love. He is the only character in the Griffin household who consistently attempts to apply a rational perspective to the chaos around him. The detail about Brian having been purchased as a puppy is established fairly early in the show. MacFarlane has confirmed that Brian was purchased from a breeder as a puppy by the Griffin family, making his current status in the household not quite a pet, not quite a person, occupying some ambiguous middle space, the result of his own unusual development, rather than some innate magical quality in the world. He is a dog who has, through some unexplained process, become more than a dog. Brian's unrequited feelings for Lois are a thread that runs through the early seasons in particular. He carries them with genuine discretion, largely suppressing them, except in moments where his defenses slip. The show handles this aspect of his character with more delicacy in the first few seasons than it does later. It is a source of pathos rather than comedy, a reminder that Brian is genuinely lonely and has chosen to organize his longing around someone who is unavailable and whose unavailability makes his longing safe. The Brian and Stewie dynamic, already discussed in detail, is the relationship that came to define Brian's character most completely in the show's later seasons. Their friendship deepened into something that the show took seriously even when it was treating other aspects of their characters with less care. The episode Brian and Stewie, from Season 8, is the most celebrated piece of evidence for this seriousness. In this bottle episode, the two characters are locked overnight in a bank vault together and have nothing to do but talk. The conversation that emerges is honest, painful, and deeply well written. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safe deposit box because there have been moments when he has thought about ending his life. Stewie reveals the depth of his love for Brian in terms so direct and unguarded that they are moving. The episode contains no cutaway gags, no pop culture references, no action. It is two characters talking, and it is one of the best things the show produced. The Season 9 episode, Brian Writes a Bestseller, is widely cited as the moment when the writers fully committed to the version of Brian that many fans found unbearable. In it, Brian produces a self-help book called Wish It, Want It, Do It, and it becomes a massive commercial success. Rather than reacting to this success with gratitude or grace, Brian becomes an absolute monster of self-importance. He condescends to everyone around him. He is cruel to Stewie, who was the one who encouraged him to write in the first place. He appears on talk shows as if his single, middling self-help book has established him as a serious intellectual voice. The episode is an indictment of a certain kind of intellectual fraud, but the show does not frame it as an indictment. It presents Brian's behavior as comedic, without clearly positioning the comedy as being at Brian's expense. The Quagmire speech from the Season 8 episode Jerome is the New Black became one of the most discussed scenes in the show's history. Quagmire explains to Brian, in precise and devastating terms, exactly why he dislikes him. He calls Brian out for being a phony, for pretending to be an intellectual while having actually accomplished nothing. He calls him out for his failed writing career, his hypocrisy, his pretentious posturing, and his persistent attempts to flirt with Lois right in front of Peter. Every point Quagmire makes is accurate. The scene works because the criticism is genuinely fair, and Quagmire, a character whose own behavior is frequently indefensible, is positioned as a credible truth-teller through the specific combination of things he chooses to critique. The show clearly intended for the audience to side with Quagmire. The writers knew Brian had become insufferable, but rather than use this moment as a turning point for the character, the show simply continued producing episodes in which Brian behaved as badly or worse than he had before. The speech changed nothing, which is itself a kind of statement about the show's willingness to address its own problems. The death of Brian Griffin in the Season 12 episode Life of Brian was treated as a genuine dramatic event within the show. Brian is hit by a car and killed. The family mourns. Stewie is devastated. A new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, arrives as a replacement. The episode trended on social media for days. Fans were genuinely upset. And then, just 2 episodes later, in the episode Christmas Guy, Stewie uses a time travel device to go back in time and prevent Brian's death. Brian returns. Vinny is erased from the timeline. Everything goes back to normal. The fan reaction to this sequence of events was complex and largely negative. Many felt that the death had been a cynical ratings move, a shock event designed to drive viewership for a few weeks, with no intention of actually following through on its implications. The resurrection, rather than bringing relief, confirmed for many viewers that the show was fundamentally unwilling to commit to consequences. If death could be undone within 2 episodes, nothing in the show could feel meaningful. Brian's relationship with women in the later seasons was one of the more consistent sources of audience frustration. In the early seasons, as mentioned, his romantic misfortunes were a source of genuine sympathy. The later Brian chased women with a combination of superficiality and dishonesty that was actively unappealing, and the show often presented his failures not as consequences of his own flaws but simply as the universe being unfair to him. Number Section 8. Side characters, recurring roles, and hidden cameos. Beyond the Griffin family and their immediate circle, Family Guy has populated the town of Quahog with an enormous cast of recurring characters, many of whom have developed detailed histories and fan followings of their own. Joe Swanson was introduced in the Season 1 episode A Hero Sits Next Door, in which Peter becomes jealous of his new neighbor's popularity and capability. Joe is a police officer who was paralyzed from the waist down during an incident that the show changes in detail every time it is referenced. The cause of Joe's injury has been described differently in multiple episodes, and the show seems to treat the inconsistency as a running joke. Despite this, Joe's character remained consistent for many years. Tough, capable, a devoted police officer, and genuinely good friend. The deterioration of his marriage to Bonnie, his increasing depression, and the way his friends began treating him as a punchline rather than a capable man were all elements of the later seasons that fans found uncomfortable. Cleveland Brown, Peter's soft-spoken friend who worked at the local deli, was a major fixture of the show for many seasons before leaving to star in his own spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, which ran from 2009 to 2013. Cleveland was created as a deliberate contrast to Peter, where Peter was loud, impulsive, and oblivious. Cleveland was calm, thoughtful, and aware of the consequences of his actions. The character's distinctive, slow, measured speaking style made him an excellent straight man within the group dynamic. After The Cleveland Show was canceled, Cleveland returned to Family Guy. Quagmire has a backstory that the show has developed in significant detail over the years. Glenn Quagmire lives at 29 Spooner Street, next door to the Griffins. He works as an airline pilot, which the show has used as a source of many jokes about his lifestyle and access. His catchphrase, "Giggity," has become one of the more widely recognized verbal tics in animated television. In the Season 8 episode Quagmire's Dad, the show revealed that Quagmire's father, Dan, was a Navy veteran who later came out as a transgender woman named Ida. The episode was controversial, drawing criticism from some quarters for its depiction of trans identity and from others for being an unusually thoughtful treatment of a subject the show had not previously handled with much care. The character of Mayor Adam West, as mentioned earlier, was a genuinely beloved figure in the show. Adam West, the real actor, leaned into the character's absurdity with what everyone who worked with him described as genuine delight. He was apparently an enthusiastic collaborator who found the character's complete detachment from reality personally entertaining. The mayor was known for making decisions based on logic systems that existed only within his own mind, purchasing things for the city that no municipality would ever require, and treating every interaction as an opportunity for a non sequitur. After West's death in 2017, the character of Mayor West was retired out of respect. Tom Tucker, the pompous local news anchor voiced by McFarlane, is one of the show's longest-running joke vehicles. Tucker presents himself with a gravity and seriousness entirely disproportionate to his actual status as a local television personality, and his interactions with co-anchor Diane Simmons and later with other colleagues have produced some consistently sharp comedy about the particular pretensions of local broadcast journalism. Tucker's relationship with his son Jake, whose face is always depicted upside down on his head, is one of those character details that the show simply committed to without explanation and never revisited. Meg's high school antagonist, Connie D'Amico, is a character who exists primarily to give Meg a peer-level tormentor. As the popular girl who makes Meg's life miserable, Connie serves a structural function in many Meg-centric episodes, but she was given some interesting moments of her own in episodes that examined what it looks like from inside the experience of being the most popular person in a social hierarchy. Neil Goldman, voiced by Seth Green in addition to his Chris duties, is the nerdy classmate who has been infatuated with Meg for much of the show's run. Neil's unrequited crush on Meg provides a kind of structural irony. The character who is treated as undesirable by everyone else is herself the object of someone else's devoted attention. The show occasionally exploits this irony in interesting ways, allowing Neil moments of genuine feeling that contrast with the casual cruelty he receives in return. James Woods appeared in the episode Peter's Got Woods, in a version of himself that became a recurring character. The episode introduced the idea that James Woods could be distracted and ultimately controlled by a trail of candy, specifically Reese's Pieces, a joke that the show returned to in subsequent appearances. Woods was apparently a good sport about the depiction, which portrayed him as both recognizable as his public self and somewhat ridiculous in his susceptibility to simple manipulation. The giant chicken Ernie is voiced by Danny Smith, one of the show's longtime writers. Smith has described voicing the character as a physical experience in itself, given that the chicken's dialogue is not traditional comedic delivery but rather the sounds of a man engaged in sustained combat. The fights between Peter and Ernie have become progressively more elaborate as the series has continued, moving through more environments and involving more destruction in each successive encounter. The show has never explained why the feud exists with the sustained intensity that it does, and the explanation would likely be less satisfying than the mystery. Lois's family, the Pewterschmidts, have provided the show with a recurring supporting cast of wealthy New England types whose values and lifestyle are consistently positioned as the opposite of what the Griffins represent. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, is an old money titan who has never fully accepted that his daughter married a man like Peter. The dynamic between Carter and Peter has been a reliable source of class-based comedy throughout the show's run, with Carter's contempt for Peter being a given and Peter's obliviousness to that contempt being equally constant. Patrick Pewterschmidt, Lois's brother who was revealed in the episode The Fat Guy Strangler to be a serial killer who targets overweight men, is one of the show's more extreme character revelations. Voiced by Robert Downey Jr. In his first appearance, Patrick is a genuinely disturbing figure whose existence is treated by the show with the same casual matter-of-factness it applies to most of its outrageous premises. The joke is not just that Lois has a serial killer brother, but that the show treats this as a family secret rather than an ongoing crisis. Dr. Elmer Hartman, the Griffin family physician voiced by McFarlane, is one of those recurring characters who exists specifically to be incompetent in ways that generate comedic situations. His medical advice is consistently wrong. His bedside manner is non-existent. His diagnostic abilities are essentially fictional. He represents a particular kind of exaggerated healthcare experience that clearly resonated with enough viewers to make him a recurring fixture rather than a one-time joke. Section 9. Episodes that changed everything. Family Guy has produced a number of episodes across its run that stand out not just as good television but as genuinely significant moments in the show's history. Episodes that either demonstrated the show at its creative peak, pushed it into genuinely controversial territory, or marked a turning point in how its characters were understood. The episode PTV from Season 4 is one of the most coherent pieces of media criticism the show ever produced. After the FCC cracks down on broadcast television content following a wardrobe malfunction at an awards show, a thinly veiled reference to the Janet Jackson incident at the 2004 Super Bowl, Peter starts his own television network in the living room to broadcast uncensored content. The episode is a sustained argument about censorship and creative freedom, and it is argued with more intelligence and specificity than most televised discussions of those topics manage. The FCC becomes an antagonist, depicted as a force of conformity that crushes creativity under the guise of protecting public morality. The episode ends with a musical number that is one of the show's most deliberately funny songs. Blue Harvest, the first episode of Season 6 and the first Family Guy Star Wars parody, is a technical achievement as much as a comedic one. The episode reimagines the plot of the original 1977 Star Wars film, using the Family Guy characters in the roles of the film's principal cast. Peter plays Han Solo, Lois plays Princess Leia, Chris plays Luke Skywalker, Stewie plays Darth Vader. Brian plays Chewbacca. The parody is executed with a level of production detail that exceeded what the show's regular episodes demanded, with the animation and the visual language being adapted to match the cinematic aesthetic of the original film. The episode was successful enough to spawn 2 sequels, Something, 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 Dark Side, based on The Empire Strikes Back, and It's a Trap, based on Return of the Jedi. All 3 were released as separate home video specials in addition to airing on television. The episode Brian and Stewie, discussed earlier, deserves another mention here because of its formal daring. Almost nothing about the episode looks like a normal Family Guy episode. There are no cutaway gags, there is no subplot. There is no third-act escalation or resolution of the kind the show typically uses. There is no laugh track moment at the end where everything is okay. The episode simply sits with 2 characters for its entire runtime and asks the audience to sit with them. It was a genuine risk for a show whose comedy had become increasingly dependent on a specific kind of quick-hit joke structure, and the reward was one of the most discussed episodes in the show's history. Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10 is the episode discussed in detail in the source material. The hurricane episode in which Meg finally confronts her family about their treatment of her, only to ultimately take it all back. The episode is one of the most divisive in the show's history, with some viewers reading it as a dark commentary on family dynamics and others finding its resolution genuinely troubling in the message it sent. The Simpsons Guy crossover episode from season 13 is the most ambitious crossover in animated sitcom history, bringing the casts of Family Guy and The Simpsons together in Springfield. The episode is self-aware about the comparison between the two shows, including a subplot in which Peter and Homer become friends, and eventually come into conflict in a fight that parodies Peter's battles with the giant chicken. Stewie's encounter with Bart and Meg's friendship with Lisa both produced moments that engaged seriously with what both shows were about and what their characters represented. The episode was a massive event for fans of both series, and required significant coordination between two different creative teams who had rarely, if ever, worked together before. Road to the Multiverse, from Season 8, pushed the animation department further than any single episode had previously. The episode required sequences animated in the style of a Disney Renaissance film, sequences in the crude visual style of the Flintstones era, sequences in a hyper-real style, sequences in a very simple stick figure style, and a live-action sequence featuring the real-life counterparts of Brian and Stewie. Each visual style required a completely different approach from the animators, and the episode achieved a level of visual variety within a single half-hour that was unprecedented for the series. The episode Death Lives from Season 3 is one of the more unexpectedly emotional entries in the show's early run. Peter is brought to a realm between life and death after a golf accident, and the episode examines his marriage to Lois through the lens of his greatest regrets. The episode contains a sequence in which Peter revisits memories of his early relationship with Lois, and these memories are drawn with a softness and warmth that the show's regular visual style did not often achieve. It is a love story hidden inside an absurdist comedy, and it worked. The episode Back to the Pilot from Season 10 sent Brian and Stewie back in time to the show's very first episode using Stewie's time machine. The episode allowed the show to comment on its own history in a way that was genuinely funny without being entirely self-congratulatory. Seeing the Season 10 versions of Brian and Stewie interact with the Season 1 versions of the characters highlighted, often hilariously, just how different the show had become in every dimension: the animation, the character voices, the comedic sensibility, and the relationship between the two main characters. The episode Viewer Mail 1 from Season 3 was an anthology episode in which the show explored 3 fan-submitted ideas for alternate versions of itself. This format, the show within, the show exploring variations on its own premise, became a recurring device in subsequent seasons, and Viewer Mail became a recurring title for episodes that gathered unrelated short pieces together. The format was borrowed from various sketch comedy traditions, but Family Guy used it to ask questions about what the show itself was and what it might be if certain variables were changed. Number. Section 10. Cultural Impact, Censorship, and Real-World Fallout. Family Guy has, across its long run, generated an unusual amount of real-world controversy, regulatory attention, and broader cultural commentary. Understanding the scope of that impact gives the show a significance that extends well beyond its role as a popular animated comedy. The Parents Television Council placed Family Guy on its list of worst primetime shows for family viewing in 2000, 2005, and 2006. The FCC received hundreds of individual complaints about specific episodes and specific content during the show's early seasons. This level of organized opposition from conservative media watchdog groups actually served counterintuitively as a kind of marketing for the show. Being named as a target by the PTC in the early 2000s had the effect of making a show seem edgier and more interesting, exactly the demographic that was most likely to watch it. The Venezuelan government's reaction to the Season 7 episode 420, in which Brian leads a legalization campaign for marijuana, is one of the more remarkable pieces of Family Guy international history. Venezuela's justice minister cited the episode as an example of the United States promoting drug use, and cable networks in the country were warned they could face fines if they continued to air the show. This made Family Guy, at that moment, an internationally banned program in one country over a specific episode's content. The ban did not last, but its existence was widely reported and contributed to the show's reputation as genuinely transgressive rather than merely provocative. The partial terms of endearment episode remains the most significant piece of American Family Guy censorship history. Written by Danny Smith and produced for Season 8, the episode deals with Lois becoming a surrogate mother for a couple who are killed in an accident, leaving her in the position of deciding what to do with the pregnancy. Fox declined to air the episode entirely, and their request that other networks, including Adult Swim, also declined to air it was honored. The BBC aired it in the United Kingdom, where it reached over 1 million homes and received positive reviews. MacFarlane staged a live table read of the episode in Hollywood to protest the ban. The episode has never aired on American television and is available only on the Season 8 DVD. The show was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009, becoming the first animated series to receive that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961, a gap of 48 years. This was a historic achievement for animated television, not just for Family Guy. The Simpsons, despite being widely considered the greatest animated comedy in television history, had never received that particular nomination. Family Guy's nomination represented a formal acknowledgement by the Television Academy that adult animated comedy could occupy the same creative space as live-action sitcoms. The show lost to 30 Rock that year, but the nomination itself was significant. The show has won 9 Primetime Emmy Awards total across 32 nominations, with most of those wins coming in the Outstanding Character Voice-Over Performance category. MacFarlane has personally won 4 of those awards for his performances as Stewie Griffin and Brian Griffin. The show has won Emmy Awards in the following categories: Outstanding Animated Program, several times, Outstanding Music Composition for a Series, and Outstanding Character Voice-Over Performance. The influence of Family Guy's specific comedic format on subsequent animated comedies is difficult to overstate. The cutaway gag, while not invented by Family Guy, was refined and popularized by the show to the point where it became a template that dozens of subsequent animated series adopted. Shows that came after Family Guy, including some that were direct creative descendants of it, structured their comedy around a similar rapid-fire reference style because Family Guy had demonstrated that this approach could find enormous audiences. The show's influence on internet comedy culture is equally significant. Family Guy was ideally suited to the early viral video landscape. A 30-second cutaway gag was exactly the kind of clip that could be uploaded to YouTube and shared across MySpace, the platform of the moment when Family Guy returned in 2005, without requiring any context. You did not need to know who these characters were to laugh at a clip. The clips were self-contained. This made Family Guy one of the most widely shared comedic properties on early social media, and it created a feedback loop in which the show's most viral moments attracted new viewers who then became regular viewers. The show created something genuinely new in terms of how animated comedy could spread culturally. Individual jokes from Family Guy became reference points in broader pop culture in a way that had previously been dominated by Saturday Night Live sketch references and Simpsons quotes. Giggity entered everyday language. Stewie's mannerisms were imitated by people who had never watched a full episode. The characters became costume choices on Halloween. The show was genuinely, pervasively influential in a way that is easy to forget now that it has been part of the culture for over 25 years. The show's relationship with other animated comedies has been contentious. The most famous example of this is the South Park 2-part episode Cartoon Wars, which aired in 2006 and directly attacked Family Guy's comedic methodology. South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone depicted Family Guy's jokes as being randomly generated by manatees pushing idea balls together, implying that the show's comedy required no genuine creative thought. Parker and Stone have been consistently critical of Family Guy in interviews, and reports suggest that writers from The Simpsons and King of the Hill contacted them after the episodes aired to express support for the criticism. The feud between South Park and Family Guy is one of the more interesting interpersonal conflicts in the history of animated comedy. MacFarlane, for his part, has been relatively measured in his public responses to criticism of Family Guy, acknowledging the show's imperfections in some instances while defending its intentions in others. He has been more openly critical of specific network decisions, including the repeated cancellations in the early years, and the decision to air episodes during the 2007 strike without his approval than he has been of the show's actual comedic choices. The show's presence on streaming platforms has given it a second or third life, with audiences who discovered it outside of its original broadcast context. Hulu carries the show's library in the United States, and the ability to watch episodes out of order without commercial interruption and at any time has changed the way many viewers experience it. The show's early seasons, in particular, have gained new appreciation from viewers who discovered them in this more flexible viewing environment and then found themselves comparing them unfavorably to later seasons in the same sitting. Number Section 11. Behind the scenes, animation, music, and production secrets. The technical production of Family Guy involves a complex international pipeline that most viewers know very little about, and the details of how the show gets from a script to a finished episode are genuinely interesting. The show's animation has been produced by several different studios across its run. The first season was primarily animated by Grimsame and Sunwoo Digital, two South Korean studios. Starting with Season 2, Rough Draft Studios became the primary animation house for the show, and the Rough Draft Association is one of the most discussed aspects of the show's visual history among animation enthusiasts. Rough Draft Studios was founded in 1991 by Greg Vanzo and his wife Nikki in Van Nuys, California. The studio established its overseas wing, Rough Draft Korea, in Seoul, South Korea. Rough Draft has a long history in American animation, having worked on Futurama, The Simpsons, and many other well-known series. Their work on Family Guy during seasons 2 through 6 is generally considered the high point of the show's visual quality by animation observers who study these things carefully. The specific quality that Rough Draft brought to Family Guy was a combination of character consistency, keeping the characters looking like themselves from shot to shot, and animation fluidity. Characters moved with a slightly elastic quality in the Rough Draft seasons that gave comedy more physical energy. A fall or a collision had weight to it because the animation committed to the impact. This is not a small thing in a comedy that relies as heavily on physical gags as Family Guy does. Starting in the later seasons, the animation was increasingly handled by Digital Emation, another South Korean studio. The transition from Rough Draft to Digital Emation as the primary studio is visible to trained eyes in the way the characters' outlines changed and in the specific quality of character movement. Digital Emation's work is technically competent, but, in the opinion of many animation observers, somewhat stiffer and less energetic than the Rough Draft years. Walter Murphy, the show's composer, has been responsible for the music of Family Guy since its beginning. Murphy is a professional composer with a specific sensibility for big band and jazz-inflected scoring that aligns naturally with MacFarlane's own musical tastes. MacFarlane, who is a genuine musical enthusiast and has released several albums of big band standards, has been consistent about his preference for live orchestral recording in the show. The instrumentation in Family Guy's score is notably warmer and more organic than most animated television series, where budget pressures typically push towards synthesized sound. Murphy scored the episode Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows in Season 3, which won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. The episode required him to write original songs that would work as genuine musical theater pieces within the context of a comedy episode, and the results were strong enough to impress the Emmy voters. The episode's main song features in a scene where Pearl, the elderly recluse Brian has befriended, sings about her history, and the song is written with a specific kind of melodic simplicity that carries genuine emotional weight. The voice recording process for Family Guy, like most animated series, typically takes place before the animation rather than after. Actors record their lines for an episode, and those recordings then go to the animation department, which uses them as the base on which to build the visual performance. This means that the animators are working to match dialogue, rather than the dialogue being recorded to match animation. This production order has implications for how expressive the animation can be. Animators can use the vocal performance to inform the physicality of the character, matching gestures and expressions to the specific qualities of the recorded voice. The recording process for MacFarlane is particularly complex because he voices so many principal characters. A scene in which Peter, Stewie, Brian, and Quagmire all appear together requires MacFarlane to switch between 4 distinct characters multiple times within the recording session. The technical challenges of this are manageable. He typically records each character's lines separately, even when the scene is meant to be occurring simultaneously, but the mental discipline required to fully inhabit each voice distinctly is significant. Alex Borstein has described the recording process as relatively solitary. Each actor typically records their lines without the other actors present, building the conversation out of individual sessions rather than live performances. This is standard for animated series and produces results that are remarkably seamless given the artificiality of the process. The editors and the directors stitch the individual performances together in post-production, and skilled voice actors develop the ability to perform their lines in a way that anticipates the beats and rhythms of a dialogue partner they are not actually present with. The show's visual design department has maintained the basic look of the Griffin family with remarkable consistency across 25 years of production. Peter's shape, his pink shirt, his round glasses, these design elements have been present since the pilot and have not changed in any fundamental way. The consistency of the visual design across such a long production run, with so many different animation studios and production staff, requires careful documentation and reference materials that the show maintains and updates regularly. The storyboarding phase of Family Guy's production is where the show's physical comedy is most directly shaped. Storyboard artists translate the script into a visual plan for each scene, and the choices they make about camera angles, character positioning, and the timing of physical gags have an enormous impact on whether those gags actually work in the finished episode. The storyboard artists on Family Guy have, over the years, developed a strong institutional knowledge of how the show's specific visual language operates, and experienced storyboarders who know the show well can often elevate material that would be merely adequate with a different visual approach. The show's use of musical theater conventions in its comedy is a consistent element that rewards attention. MacFarlane's musical background means that the show regularly deploys musical sequences not just as jokes but as genuine pieces of songwriting. The Road 2 episodes in particular have featured original songs that work as actual songs with melodic hooks, clever rhymes, and harmonic sophistication, rather than simply being jokes that happen to be set to music. The score for these sequences is typically fuller and more orchestrated than the regular episode score, creating a miniature musical theater production within the context of an animated sitcom. One production detail that many viewers do not know: the show's opening title sequence has changed numerous times across its run, incorporating new visual gags and references to recent events in each season. The living room sequence that plays out during the theme song has included references to that season's storylines, guest appearances, and cultural events. Dedicated fans have cataloged dozens of variations, and watching these changes across seasons is a kind of compressed visual history of the show's timeline. Section 12. Legacy, the decline debate, and the show's future. As of 2025, Family Guy had secured a renewal deal with parent company Disney that would take the show through its 27th season and the 2028 to 2029 television season, coinciding with the show's 30th anniversary. Each season under this deal consists of 15 episodes. The show is not going away. The rating story, as discussed in the source material, is stark. From 22 million viewers for the premiere to approximately 723,000 viewers for season 23, the audience contraction is one of the most dramatic in the history of American television. The show lost more than 96% of its peak audience over the course of its run. By the time season 23 aired, fewer people were watching new Family Guy episodes than live in a mid-sized American city. And yet the show persists. The economics of animated television are different from live action, and Family Guy's profitability has never depended primarily on new episode viewership. The show generates revenue through streaming rights, cable syndication, merchandise, international licensing, and a catalog of episodes that continues to accumulate value. The show that averaged 723,000 viewers for new episodes was simultaneously being watched by many more people in reruns on Adult Swim and in streaming on Hulu. The business case for continuing production remained sound even as the live viewership numbers shrank. The move from Sunday night's Family Guy's home for most of its run to Wednesday nights in the 2023 to 2024 season was a significant demotion in the television industry's implicit hierarchy. Sunday nights in prime time are where networks put their most important programs. Wednesday nights are where they put things that have value but are no longer considered essential. The shift from Sunday to Wednesday was Fox acknowledging, in the most diplomatic way available to it, that Family Guy was no longer the cultural touchstone it had been. MacFarlane's relationship with Fox remained complicated into the show's later seasons. His 2021 social media post expressing frustration with Fox News and comparing his relationship with the network to a failing marriage was a public statement of attention that had been building for years. His 2020 deal with NBC Universal, worth approximately $200 million over 5 years and covering his production company, Fuzzy Door Productions, moved his newer creative work entirely away from the Fox ecosystem. Family Guy became, in effect, an ongoing contractual obligation rather than an active creative passion. In interviews from 2024, MacFarlane described Family Guy's continued production in terms of financial utility and audience demand rather than in terms of creative excitement. He noted that the show funded charitable causes he cared about, including environmental conservation through organizations like Rainforest Trust. He said the show had reached what he called escape velocity. It had been running so long that there was no logical endpoint unless the audience disappeared entirely. This is a significant reframing of why a show exists. The early MacFarlane, who pitched Fox on a 15-minute pilot in 1998, had something to say. The 2024 MacFarlane saw a vehicle for philanthropic funding and an obligation to the audience that still showed up. The comparison to American Dad is one that comes up consistently in any honest assessment of Family Guy's later years. American Dad, created by MacFarlane with Mike Barker and Matt Weitzman, premiered in 2005 and continued to air for many seasons without experiencing the same level of creative deterioration that Family Guy showed. The two shows' different trajectories, despite sharing a creator, a network, and an early period of parallel development, offer a genuinely informative study in how creative choices affect long-term quality. American Dad made a fundamental structural choice that Family Guy never fully committed to. It built every episode around a plot rather than around a collection of unrelated moments. Without the cutaway gag format as a safety net, the American Dad writing staff had to make every episode work as a story, and the discipline this imposed improved their storytelling skills over time, rather than allowing the atrophy that came from Family Guy's increasing reliance on disconnected humor. The treatment of characters in American Dad also diverged significantly from Family Guy. Stan Smith, the show's protagonist, a patriotic, hypermasculine CIA agent who begins the series as essentially a one-dimensional political caricature, grew into a complex character whose conservatism was examined from multiple angles over the show's run. He had episodes where he was the hero and episodes where he was clearly wrong, and both felt earned because the writers had built a character with enough complexity to contain contradictions. Peter Griffin, by contrast, moved in the opposite direction, from a complex character with a mix of good and bad qualities toward a less complex character whose bad qualities increasingly overwhelmed everything else. Roger the Alien, American Dad's most inventive character creation, provided that show with an engine of comic possibility that Family Guy's equivalent characters could not match. Roger's ability to adopt completely different personas, different names, different backstories, different physical presentations meant that every episode could effectively feature a new character without abandoning the established cast. The Stewie of the early Family Guy seasons had a similarly rich concept, the evil genius baby, but the writers chose to retire that concept rather than find new ways to develop it. Roger's persona gimmick was, in contrast, designed to be inexhaustible. The question of whether Family Guy's decline was inevitable or chosen is one that the American Dad comparison helps to answer. If any show that runs long enough inevitably declines, American Dad should have declined at a similar rate and in a similar pattern. It did not. The difference was not the length of time on the air. The difference was the specific creative decisions made by the people steering each show. The show did make genuine improvements in some areas in its later seasons. The treatment of Meg Griffin, as noted, became less severe after the writing staff became more gender-balanced, and there were episodes in the show's later seasons that developed Meg as a character with competence, resilience, and specific interests, rather than simply as a target. This change was real and meaningful, even if it came many seasons later than it should have. The show also continued to produce individual episodes of genuine quality even in its declining period. The Brian and Stewie bottle episode, Road to the Multiverse, The Simpsons crossover, all of these came after the show's critical consensus had already begun to turn. The talent was still present. The capability was still there. The show could still do good work when the conditions were right, and the writing staff committed to something specific rather than falling back on the easiest available choices. There is a genuine tension in how to assess a show like Family Guy in its totality. The early seasons are, by most measures, exceptional television. The later seasons are, by most measures, significantly less exceptional. The The show exists across a spectrum that covers both of those evaluations simultaneously, and the decision about how to weigh them against each other is personal. Someone who loves the show tends to give significant weight to the early seasons and to the individual later episodes that worked. Someone who has grown tired of the show tends to weight the long decline most heavily. What is not really debatable is that Family Guy changed animation. It changed the comedy landscape. It demonstrated things about what an animated series could be and do, and get away with that informed everything that came after it. The show that premiered in 1999 to 22 million post-Super Bowl viewers and was canceled and returned and canceled again and returned and kept going for 25 years is one of the strangest success stories in television history. It is the story of a show that survived everything that should have killed it, persisted through every adverse circumstance, and ultimately outlasted its own golden period by many seasons. The fans who watched the first 3 seasons before the cancellation, who then found the show again on Adult Swim, who bought the DVD sets, who brought it back from the dead, who showed up for Season 4 and Season 5, and then kept showing up even as the show changed. Those fans are the central characters of Family Guy's actual story. The show was about a family that stuck together despite everything, and the audience that loved it behaved in much the same way. They stuck with it, despite everything. Whether the Family Guy of the 2020s is still worth watching depends entirely on what you are looking for. If you want the specific combination of heart and edge that the early seasons offered, the early seasons are where that lives. If you want the specific chemistry of Brian and Stewie at their most functional, the Road 2 episodes across the show's middle seasons deliver that reliably. If you want the show's most formally adventurous work, the Bottle episodes and the multiverse parody represent it at its most ambitious. The show is large enough and long enough to contain all of those things simultaneously. Number Section 13. Comprehensive Facts Compilation. 300 Things You Should Know. Let us go through everything, piece by piece, fact by fact, with the kind of detail that rewards careful listening at the end of a long day. Get comfortable. These are 300 facts about Family Guy, and there is no rush. Fact 1. Seth MacFarlane was born on the 26th of October, 1973, in Kent, Connecticut. Fact 2. MacFarlane had an interest in cartooning from a very young age and was creating his own comic strips before he reached high school. Fact 3. He attended the Rhode Island School of Design, where he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree with a focus on animation. Fact 4. While at RISD, MacFarlane had originally intended to pursue a career at Disney after graduation, but changed his mind. Fact 5. His senior thesis film at RISD was The Life of Larry, a short animated film created in 1995 that became the direct precursor to Family Guy. Fact 6. The Life of Larry featured a middle-aged man named Larry, his talking dog Steve, a patient wife named Lois, and a son named Milt. Fact 7. Larry would eventually become Peter Griffin. Steve would eventually become Brian Griffin. Fact 8. MacFarlane based Peter Griffin's voice on a security guard at RISD named Paul Timmons, who spoke with a thick Rhode Island accent and complete absence of self-editing. Fact 9. Paul Timmons was located by an ABC News affiliate in 2013 and confirmed that he was the visual and vocal inspiration for Peter. Fact 10. The Life of Larry was 11 minutes long and was released on the 26th of July, 1995. Fact 11. A professor at RISD submitted the film to Hanna-Barbera, which led directly to MacFarlane being hired. Fact 12. MacFarlane was recruited at the RISD Senior Film Festival by development executive Ellen Cockrell and President Fred Seibert. Fact 13. He was one of the very few people Hanna-Barbera had ever hired, based primarily on writing quality rather than cartooning ability. Fact 14. At Hanna-Barbera, MacFarlane worked on Dexter's Laboratory and Johnny Bravo, among other Cartoon Network series. Fact 15. He described Hanna-Barbera's work environment as an old-fashioned Hollywood structure where you moved from show to show. Fact 16. In 1996, MacFarlane created a sequel to The Life of Larry called Larry and Steve, featuring the same 2 main characters. Fact 17. Larry and Steve was broadcast on Cartoon Network as part of their World Premiere Toons programming block in 1997. Fact 18. Fox executives saw both Larry shorts and asked MacFarlane to develop a full television series based on those characters. Fact 19. Fox gave MacFarlane a budget of $50,000 to produce a 15-minute pilot presentation. Fact 20. MacFarlane has said the pilot took approximately 6 months to create and produce, with him doing most of the work himself. Fact 21. Fox signed MacFarlane to a production deal in May of 1998, reportedly worth approximately $2.5 million per year. Fact 22. MacFarlane was approximately 24 years old when he received his own primetime network television show. Fact 23. Family Guy premiered on the 31st of January, 1999, immediately following Super Bowl 33 on Fox. Fact 24. The first episode, Death Has a Shadow, drew approximately 22 million viewers. Fact 25. The show's first season averaged 12.8 million households tuning in per week. Fact 26. The first season ranked number 33 in the overall Nielsen ratings for the 1998 to 1999 television season. Fact 27. The show is set in a fictional Rhode Island town. The name of the town is a type of hard-shelled clam native to the northeastern United States. Fact 28. Peter Griffin worked at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory in the early seasons before transitioning to the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. Fact 29. Lois Griffin's maiden name is Pewterschmidt, and she comes from a wealthy New England family. Fact 30. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street. Fact 31. Fox moved Family Guy to Thursday nights in its second season, directly competing with Frasier on NBC. Fact 32. Fox then moved it to Tuesday nights, where it ran against Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on ABC. Fact 33. Fox canceled Family Guy for the first time after its third season in 2002. Fact 34. One episode was left unaired at the time of cancellation. Fact 35. Cartoon Network acquired the syndication rights to Family Guy for a minimal sum because the canceled show was not considered commercially valuable. Fact 36. Family Guy reruns premiered on Adult Swim on the 20th of April 2003. Fact 37. The Adult Swim reruns immediately made Family Guy the highest-rated program on the block. Fact 38. The Adult Swim reruns boosted viewership by 239%. Fact 39. The Family Guy Season 1 and 2 DVD set was released in the same week the Adult Swim reruns began. Fact 40. The DVD set sold 400,000 copies within its first month. Fact 41. Total sales of the first and second season DVD set reached 2.2 million copies. Fact 42. That made it the best-selling television DVD of 2003. Fact 43. The only television DVD to have outsold it to that point was the first season of Chappelle's Show on Comedy Central. Fact 44. The Season 3 DVD set also sold over 1 million copies. Fact 45. By 2004, Fox announced it was ordering new episodes of Family Guy. Fact 46. Family Guy became the first television series to be brought back from cancellation based primarily on syndication ratings and home video sales. Fact 47. The fourth season premiered on the 1st of May 2005. Fact 48. Fox placed the revived Family Guy within a Sunday night lineup called Animation Domination, alongside The Simpsons, King of the Hill, and American Dad. Fact 49. American Dad premiered on the 6th of February 2005, a few months before Family Guy's revival. Fact 50. American Dad was co-created by Seth MacFarlane, Mike Barker, and Matt Weitzman. Fact 51. Seth MacFarlane voices 4 of Family Guy's principal characters: Peter Griffin, Stewie Griffin, Brian Griffin, and Glenn Quagmire. Fact 52. MacFarlane developed Stewie's voice as a falsetto impression inspired by actor Rex Harrison's performance in the 1964 film My Fair Lady. Fact 53. MacFarlane has described Stewie as an evil Rex Harrison. Fact 54. Stewie's British accent was revealed in the Season 10 episode Send in Stewie, pleased to be a deliberate affectation rather than his natural voice. Fact 55. Stewie's real voice, when he drops the affectation, sounds like a higher-pitched version of Brian's voice, which is itself close to MacFarlane's natural speaking voice. Fact 56. Stewie's football-shaped head was a deliberate design choice intended to make him distinctively non-cute. Fact 57. In the episode Send in Stewie, Please, Stewie's therapist was voiced by Sir Ian McKellen. Fact 58. Stewie was literally 0 years old when the first episode aired, having been born less than 4 months before the events of the pilot. Fact 59. Stewie's first birthday occurs in the Season 1 episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang. Fact 60. Stewie holds a grudge against Lois because of his 9-month stay in what he has described as her ovarian bastille. Fact 61. Stewie's teddy bear is named Rupert, and Stewie treats him as his closest confidant. Fact 62. Brian Griffin was conceived as a self-insert character for MacFarlane's own sensibilities. Fact 63. Brian is a Labrador Retriever who is 8 years old in the first episode, placing him in his mid-50s in human equivalent years. Fact 64. Brian has been working on a novel for most of the show's run without completing it. Fact 65. Brian's unrequited feelings for Lois are a recurring thread in the early seasons. Fact 66. The Road to episode format, featuring Brian and Stewie on adventures together, began with Road to Rhode Island in Season 2. Fact 67. Road to Rhode Island references the classic Bing Crosby and Bob Hope road film series. Fact 68. Alex Borstein has voiced Lois Griffin since the beginning of the series. Fact 69. Borstein based Lois's voice on a relative from Long Island. Fact 70. MacFarlane told Borstein to make the voice less annoying and to speed it up, or every episode would last 4 hours. Fact 71. Fox nearly fired Borstein before the show launched, requiring her to re-audition for the role of Lois. Fact 72. Borstein had to re-audition alongside every actress in Hollywood by her own account. Fact 73. Meg Griffin was voiced by Lacey Chabert in Season 1. Fact 74. Chabert left the role after the first season. Fact 75. During the transition period, Alex Borstein temporarily voiced Meg at table reads while a replacement was found. Fact 76. Mila Kunis took over the role of Meg starting with the episode Let's Go to the Hop. Fact 77. Mila Kunis was 15 years old when she first auditioned for the role of Meg. Fact 78. When asked her age during the audition, Kunis reportedly said she would be 18, without specifying that this would happen in the future. Fact 79. Seth Green voices Chris Griffin. Fact 80. Seth Green's audition for Chris was reportedly done using an impression of Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, on a dare from a friend. Fact 81. Seth Green also voices Neil Goldman, the nerdy classmate with a crush on Meg. Fact 82. Patrick Warburton voices Joe Swanson. Fact 83. Warburton also played David Puddy on Seinfeld, The Tick in the live-action series, and Kronk in The Emperor's New Groove. Fact 84. Jennifer Tilly voiced Bonnie Swanson for many seasons. Fact 85. Bonnie Swanson was perpetually pregnant for 7 seasons before giving birth in Season 7. Fact 86. Adam West played Mayor Adam West, a self-parody character, until his death in June 2017. Fact 87. West was reportedly delighted by the character's absurdist premise and embraced it fully. Fact 88. The character of Mayor Adam West was retired after West's passing. Fact 89. Cleveland Brown was a main character on Family Guy before starring in the Cleveland Show spin-off from 2009 to 2013. Fact 90. Cleveland returned to Family Guy after the Cleveland Show was canceled. Fact 91. Tom Tucker, the local news anchor, is voiced by MacFarlane. Fact 92. Tom Tucker's son Jake always appears with his face upside down on his head. The show has never explained this. Fact 93. Herbert, the elderly neighbor with inappropriate feelings toward Chris, is voiced by Mike Henry. Fact 94. Herbert was included in a TV Guide list of the greatest television characters. Fact 95. The show's theme music was composed by Walter Murphy, who has scored the show throughout its run. Fact 96. MacFarlane insists on using a live orchestra for Family Guy's musical scoring rather than digital instrumentation. Fact 97. Walter Murphy won an Emmy Award for the score of the Season 3 episode Brian Wallows and Peter's Swallows. Fact 98. The Emmy was for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics, and it was the first Emmy the show ever won for an episode. Fact 99. Director Dan Povenmire of that episode later became the co-creator of Phineas and Ferb. Fact 100. Povenmire joked that MacFarlane received the Emmy while privately acknowledging that the direction was responsible for it. Fact 101. The first giant chicken fight occurs in the Season 2 episode Da Boom. Fact 102. The giant chicken's name is Ernie. Fact 103. Ernie the giant chicken is voiced by Danny Smith, one of the show's longtime writers. Fact 104. Danny Smith also voices the television announcers in many episodes. Fact 105. The giant chicken fights have become progressively more elaborate with each appearance. Fact 106. The show has never explained why Peter and Ernie's feud is maintained with such sustained intensity. Fact 107. The original trigger for the feud was Ernie giving Peter a coupon that had expired. Fact 108. Season 1 was animated primarily by Grimsame and Sunwoo Digital, two South Korean animation studios. Fact 109. Rough Draft Studios became the primary animation house starting with Season 2. Fact 110. Rough Draft Studios was founded in 1991 by Greg Van Zo and his wife Nikki in Van Nuys, California. Fact 111. Rough Draft has a sister studio in Seoul, South Korea, called Rough Draft Korea. Fact 112. Rough Draft Korea also worked on Futurama, SpongeBob SquarePants, Phineas and Ferb, and many other major animated series. Fact 113. The Rough Draft years of Family Guy, approximately seasons 2 through 6, are generally considered the visual high point of the show. Fact 114. Starting in the later seasons, Digital Emation, another South Korean studio, became the primary animation house. Fact 115. Digital Emation's animation style is generally considered to be stiffer and less energetic than Rough Draft's work. Fact 116. The show's opening title sequence has been updated numerous times across its run to include seasonal references and contemporary jokes. Fact 117. Voice actors typically record their lines individually rather than together, and the performances are edited together in post-production. Fact 118. McFarlane's ability to switch between 4 distinct character voices within a single recording session is considered a remarkable voice acting achievement. Fact 119. The episode When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was pulled from Fox's broadcast schedule in the year 2000 due to concerns about anti-Semitic content. Fact 120. The episode eventually aired on Adult Swim in 2003 after the show's cancellation. Fact 121. Fox subsequently aired the episode in 2004. Fact 122. The episode featured Ben Stein as Max Weinstein, a Jewish financial advisor Peter seeks out based on a stereotype. Fact 123. The episode contains a parody of a song from An American Tail, itself a film about Jewish immigration. Fact 124. Partial Terms of Endearment is the only episode of Family Guy that has never aired on American television. Fact 125. The episode was written by Danny Smith and dealt with Lois becoming a surrogate mother. Fact 126. Fox declined to air the episode and requested other networks, including Adult Swim, also decline. That request was honored. Fact 127. The BBC in the United Kingdom aired the episode, where it reached over 1 million homes and received positive reviews. Fact 128. McFarlane staged a live table read of the banned episode in Hollywood as a form of protest. Fact 129. Partial Terms of Endearment is available on the Season 8 DVD, but is not available on Hulu or other streaming platforms. Fact 130. The Venezuela government banned Family Guy from local cable networks in reaction to the Season 7 episode 420 about marijuana legalization. Fact 131. Venezuela's Justice Minister cited the episode as an example of the United States promoting drug use. Fact 132. Family Guy was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009. Fact 133. This made Family Guy the first animated series to receive that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961. Fact 134. The Flintstones nomination had come 48 years earlier. Fact 135. The Simpsons, despite being widely considered the greatest animated comedy ever made, had never received that specific nomination. Fact 136. Family Guy lost the Outstanding Comedy Series Emmy to 30 Rock in 2009. Fact 137. Family Guy has won 9 Primetime Emmy Awards total across 32 nominations. Fact 138. Seth MacFarlane has personally won 4 Emmy Awards for his voice performances on the show. Fact 139. MacFarlane won his first Emmy for Outstanding Voice-Over Performance for playing Stewie Griffin in 2000. Fact 140. TV Guide ranked Family Guy as the 9th greatest television cartoon of all time in 2013. Fact 141. The Parents Television Council placed Family Guy on its list of worst primetime shows for family viewing in 2000, 2005, and 2006. Fact 142. The FCC received numerous complaints about the show's content during its early seasons. Fact 143. South Park's two-part episode Cartoon Wars, which aired in 2006, directly criticized Family Guy's writing methodology. Fact 144. South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone depicted Family Guy's jokes as being randomly generated by manatees pushing idea balls together. Fact 145. Parker and Stone reportedly received calls from Simpsons and King of the Hill writers thanking them for making the Cartoon Wars episodes. Fact 146. Seth MacFarlane was booked on American Airlines Flight 1 on the morning of the 11th of September, 2001. Fact 147. Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Fact 148. MacFarlane missed the flight by approximately 10 minutes due to a hangover from the night before and a scheduling mix-up with his travel agent. Fact 149. His travel agent had given him the wrong departure time, telling him the flight left at 8:15 a.m. rather than 7:45 a.m. Fact 150. MacFarlane went into the airport lounge and fell asleep, waking up approximately 45 minutes later to learn what had happened. Fact 151. He told an interviewer that he turned to the person next to him and said, "My God, that was the flight I was supposed to be on." Fact 152. Mark Wahlberg was also scheduled to fly on Flight 1 that morning and changed plans at the last minute. Fact 153. MacFarlane has made several references to September 11th on Family Guy in subsequent years. Fact 154. A Bin Laden airport gag that appeared in the 2000 episode Road to Rhode Island was removed from the original DVD release. Fact 155. The episode Back to the Pilot, from Season 10, involved a storyline in which Brian travels back in time and inadvertently prevents the September 11th attacks, causing larger problems. Fact 156. The Writers Guild of America went on strike in November of 2007, affecting Family Guy's production. Fact 157. The 2007 to 2008 WGA strike lasted until the 12th of February, 2008. Fact 158. MacFarlane was a prominent supporter of the strike and joined the picket lines. Fact 159. Fox aired 3 completed Family Guy episodes during the strike without MacFarlane's approval, creating significant tension between the creator and the network. Fact 160. The Season 3 episode Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows was the episode that won Family Guy its first Emmy for an individual episode. Fact 161. The Road to Europe episode in Season 2 sent Brian and Stewie to England and Germany in pursuit of Stewie's favorite television program. Fact 162. Road to Rupert in Season 5 featured a storyline about Stewie's teddy bear being sold at a garage sale. Fact 163. Road to Germany, from Season 7, sent Brian and Stewie to Nazi Germany during the Second World War via a malfunctioning time machine. Fact 164. Road to the Multiverse, from Season 8, is widely considered the best episode of the show's post-revival period. Fact 165. Road to the Multiverse required the animation department to produce sequences in multiple completely different visual styles within a single episode. Fact 166. One visual style used in Road to the Multiverse was a parody of Walt Disney's classic animated films, including characters with Disney-era proportions and character design. Fact 167. The Season 6 two-parter Stewie Kills Lois and Lois Kills Stewie is considered by many fans to be the last great use of evil Stewie as a character. Fact 168. The two-parter revealed that the entire storyline was a simulation on Stewie's laptop, undoing its apparent consequences. Fact 169. The revelation that the consequences were not real was interpreted by many fans as a reflection of the show's broader unwillingness to commit to lasting change. Fact 170. The Season 8 bottle episode Brian and Stewie contains no cutaway gags and no pop culture references. Fact 171. In Brian and Stewie. Brian reveals to Stewie that he keeps a gun in a safe deposit box because he has had thoughts about ending his own life. Fact 172. Brian and Stewie is consistently cited as one of the most emotionally resonant episodes the show ever produced. Fact 173. The Season 12 episode Life of Brian depicts the death of Brian Griffin, who is hit by a car. Fact 174. A new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, was introduced as Brian's replacement in the immediate aftermath of his death. Fact 175. Just 2 episodes after Life of Brian, the episode Christmas Guy brought Brian back to life via time travel. Fact 176. Vinny was erased from the timeline when Stewie prevented Brian's death. Fact 177. The Brian death and resurrection was widely seen by fans and critics as a cynical rating stunt. Fact 178. The death of Brian Griffin made national news and trended on social media for several days. Fact 179. The episode PTV from Season 4 is a sustained argument about broadcast censorship and the FCC. Fact 180. PTV was inspired in part by the fallout from a Super Bowl halftime show wardrobe malfunction in 2004. Fact 181. The Season 6 episode Blue Harvest parodied the original 1977 Star Wars film using the Family Guy characters. Fact 182. Blue Harvest was successful enough to spawn 2 sequels, Something 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 Dark Side and It's a Trap. Fact 183. Something 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 Dark Side parodied The Empire Strikes Back. Fact 184. It's a Trap parodied Return of the Jedi. Fact 185. All 3 Star Wars parody episodes were released as home video specials in addition to airing on television. Fact 186. The Season 13 crossover episode, The Simpsons Guy, brought the Family Guy cast into Springfield for an extended story. Fact 187. The Simpsons Guy is the longest episode in Family Guy history and required coordination between 2 separate creative teams. Fact 188. In The Simpsons Guy, Homer and Peter have a physical fight that parodies Peter's battles with the giant chicken. Fact 189. Homer throws Emmy awards at Peter during the fight. Peter cannot retaliate with Emmys because he has none. Fact 190. Roger from American Dad appears briefly in The Simpsons Guy and immediately leaves, referencing the fact that American Dad had moved from Fox to TBS. Fact 191. Meg's storyline in The Simpsons Guy involves her befriending Lisa Simpson, who encourages her and discovers that she has a talent for playing saxophone. Fact 192. The Season 10 anthology episode Viewer Mail 2 included a sketch in which the Griffin family is depicted as British, with everyone having a British accent except Stewie, who speaks like an American Southerner. Fact 193. The implication of the British family sketch is that Stewie is inherently the opposite of whoever is around him, regardless of what that means culturally. Fact 194. James Woods appeared in a Family Guy episode as a version of himself, playing a character who could be distracted and controlled by a trail of candy, specifically Reese's Pieces. Fact 195. The James Woods character became a recurring figure, with the candy manipulation gag returning in subsequent appearances. Fact 196. Robert Downey Jr. voiced Lois's brother Patrick Pewterschmidt in the episode The Fat Guy Strangler. Fact 197. Patrick Pewterschmidt is revealed to be a serial killer who targets overweight men. Fact 198. Cate Blanchett voiced Penelope, a baby girl antagonist for Stewie, in a Season 10 episode. Fact 199. Penelope was designed as a villain counterpart to Stewie with comparable intellectual and technical capabilities. Fact 200. The Season 8 episode Quagmire's Dad revealed that Quagmire's father was a Navy veteran who later came out as a transgender woman named Ida. Fact 201. The episode received criticism from some observers for its depiction of trans identity and from others who felt it was an unusually careful treatment of the subject for Family Guy. Fact 202. In the episode Jerome is the New Black from Season 8, Quagmire delivers an extended speech about everything he dislikes about Brian's character. Fact 203. Every specific criticism Quagmire makes in the speech is backed up by things the show has actually depicted Brian doing. Fact 204. The Quagmire speech changed nothing about Brian's behavior in subsequent episodes. Fact 205. Alex Sulkin has voiced Jesus Christ in several Family Guy episodes. Fact 206. In MacFarlane's 2010 interview, he explained that Stewie's voice came from reading about the production of My Fair Lady and being amused by Rex Harrison's specific vocal quality. Fact 207. MacFarlane has said there was something about Rex Harrison's speaking style that he found amusing and ridiculous, and decided to put it in the body of a baby. Fact 208. The Conway Twitty running gag in which the show cuts away to a full, unedited performance of a Conway Twitty song with no punchline has appeared multiple times across several seasons. Fact 209. The Conway Twitty gag became widely cited as one of the laziest pieces of television comedy ever broadcast. Fact 210. The show's first season averaged the show an average of approximately 12.8 million households. Fact 211. The show's fourth season, the first after the revival, averaged approximately 7.9 million viewers. Fact 212. By season 13, average viewership had dropped to 5.86 million. Fact 213. Season 20 averaged just 1.31 million viewers. Fact 214. Season 23 averaged approximately 723,000 viewers. Fact 215. The show was moved from Sunday nights to Wednesday nights for the 2023 to 2024 broadcast season, the first time it had aired on a weekday since 2002. Fact 216. Family Guy was moved from its longtime Sunday 9 p.m. slot to 9:30 p.m. in 2019, an early sign of reduced prominence. Fact 217. In April 2025, Family Guy secured a renewal deal with Disney that would take the show through season 27 and the 2028 to 2029 television season. Fact 218. The renewal would coincide with the show's 30th anniversary. Fact 219. Each season under the renewal deal consists of 15 episodes. Fact 220. MacFarlane signed a production deal with NBC Universal in 2020, reportedly worth approximately $200 million over 5 years. Fact 221. The NBC Universal deal moved his production company, Fuzzy Door Productions, away from the Fox ecosystem. Fact 222. MacFarlane has publicly described his relationship with Fox as resembling a failing marriage. Fact 223. In a 2021 social media post, MacFarlane expressed frustration with Fox News and said he wished Family Guy was on any other network. Fact 224. During the 2023 WGA strike, MacFarlane joined the picket lines again, consistent with his stance during the 2007 to 2008 strike. Fact 225. MacFarlane said in 2024 interviews that he saw Family Guy's continued production partly as a vehicle for funding charitable causes, including environmental conservation. Fact 226. He mentioned Rainforest Trust specifically as an organization the show's revenues help support. Fact 227. MacFarlane described Family Guy as having reached escape velocity, meaning it had been running long enough that there was no logical endpoint unless the audience disappeared. Fact 228. The original writing staff assembled for Family Guy included Chris Sheridan, Danny Smith, Gary Janetti, Ricky Blitt, Neil Goldman, Garrett Donovan, Matt Weitzman, and Mike Barker. Fact 229. Most of these writers left during the cancellation period and were not available when the show returned in 2005. Fact 230. Rich Appel and Alex Sulkin took over the show's creative direction from MacFarlane around 2011. Fact 231. Appel and Sulkin had both been with the show for years before taking over the creative steering from MacFarlane. Fact 232. MacFarlane has continued to voice his characters throughout the show's run, remaining in the recording booth even after stepping back from active creative involvement. Fact 233. The Ted film, co-written, directed by, and starring MacFarlane, was released in 2012 and earned over $500 million worldwide. Fact 234. A Million Ways to Die in the West was MacFarlane's second feature film as director, released in 2014. Fact 235. Ted 2 was released in 2015. Fact 236. MacFarlane created and starred in the science fiction series The Orville, which premiered on Fox in 2017 before moving to Hulu. Fact 237. McFarlane produced a live-action Ted prequel series for Peacock that launched in 2024. Fact 238. McFarlane has released multiple albums of big band and jazz standards. Fact 239. The show's music has always been performed by a live orchestra rather than digital instruments. Fact 240. Stewie's equipment in the first season included a ray gun, a mind control helmet, and a time machine. Fact 241. The time machine remained one of the show's most durable recurring props and appeared in episodes across many seasons. Fact 242. The show's approach to who can hear and understand Stewie was inconsistent from the beginning and was largely abandoned over time. Fact 243. In the earliest episodes, most adults heard Stewie as babbling rather than as intelligible speech. Fact 244. Brian was established early as one of the few characters who could consistently understand and converse with Stewie. Fact 245. Chris was shown to understand Stewie in some later seasons. Fact 246. The Stewie Griffin, the Untold Story direct-to-video film, was released in September 2005, edited from 3 season 4 episodes. Fact 247. The film included content that the broadcast version of the show could not air due to network standards. Fact 248. The episode Peter Griffin, Husband, Father, Brother, in Season 3 addressed the history of slavery in America through Peter's family history. Fact 249. The Season 3 episode Stuck Together, Torn Apart showed Peter and Lois briefly separating and then reconciling, and worked because the show believed in their relationship. Fact 250. In The Thin White Line, from Season 3, Brian becomes addicted to cocaine and goes through a rehabilitation storyline. Fact 251. The Season 3 episode Brian Does Hollywood featured Brian pursuing a career in the adult film industry. Fact 252. The Season 3 episode Death Lives contains an unusually emotional examination of Peter's regrets about his marriage. Fact 253. Death Lives included dream sequences drawn with a softness and warmth different from the show's regular visual style. Fact 254. The viewer mail episode format, used several times across the show's run, gathered unrelated short segments under a framing device of fan submissions. Fact 255. The Season 1 episode Mind Over Murder built a bar in the Griffin basement and examined the Peter and Lois relationship with genuine care. Fact 256. Joe Swanson's injury and resulting wheelchair use was given different backstories in different episodes, and the show eventually treated the inconsistency as a running joke. Fact 257. Bonnie Swanson was voiced by Jennifer Tilly. Fact 200 and 258. The character of Loretta Brown, Cleveland's first wife, was voiced by Alex Borstein before the character was written out. Fact 259. The show has maintained the Griffin family's home design with reasonable consistency across 25 years, despite multiple animation studios handling production. Fact 260. In Road to Rhode Island, Brian visits the farm where he was born and discovers that his mother has died. Fact 261. The discovery of Brian's mother in the episode involves a form of black comedy that the show also treats with genuine pathos. Fact 262. The Season 9 episode Brian Writes a Bestseller is frequently cited as the moment the writers fully committed to Brian's most insufferable characterization. Fact 263. Brian's self-help book in that episode was titled Wish It, Want It, Do It. Fact 264. The book became a massive commercial success, and Brian's reaction to that success was to become condescending toward everyone around him, including Stewie. Fact 265. The episode Seahorse Seashell Party in Season 10 featured Meg confronting her family during a hurricane and then taking it all back. Fact 266. The episode's conclusion, Meg voluntarily resuming her role as the family punching bag, was one of the most criticized character moments in the show's history. Fact 200 and 267. The treatment of Meg became noticeably less severe after the writing room became more gender-balanced, starting around Season 14 to 15. Fact 268. The Season 14 episode Peter's Sister explained Peter's mistreatment of Meg by revealing that Peter's own sister had bullied and abused him growing up. Fact 269. Meg and Peter reconcile in Peter's Sister, but the reconciliation does not affect their dynamic in subsequent episodes. Fact 270. Mila Kunis has spoken publicly about people saying the dismissive Meg catchphrase to her in real life. Fact 271. The show's approach to sexual orientation, particularly in Stewie's case, shifted from ambiguity to much more direct exploration in later seasons. Fact 272. Stewie explicitly identifies as bisexual in the episode Send in Stewie, Please. Fact 273. The show increasingly featured Stewie cross-dressing and expressing attraction to male characters from Season 4 onward. Fact 274. The Season 8 episode Jerome is the New Black introduced a new regular at the Drunken Clam, Jerome, voiced by Kevin Michael Richardson. Fact 275. The character of Dr. Hartman, the Griffin family's incompetent physician, is voiced by McFarlane. Fact 276. Dr. Hartman is consistently portrayed as incompetent, with his medical advice regularly being wrong or harmful. Fact 277. Lois Griffin has also worked as a journalist and a fashion model in various episode storylines. Fact 278. Carter Pewterschmidt, Lois's father, is voiced by McFarlane in a voice that differs distinctly from all of his other principal character voices. Fact 279. The episode The Fat Guy Strangler established that Lois has a brother named Patrick who was kept secret from the family. Fact 280. Patrick Pewterschmidt's serial killing targets overweight men, which creates a specific danger for Peter. Fact 281. Quagmire's voice is described by McFarlane as being influenced by mid-century lounge culture and a retro bachelor pad aesthetic. Fact 282. Quagmire's catchphrase, giggity, has entered broader cultural vocabulary beyond the show. Fact 283. Quagmire works as an airline pilot, which the show uses as a source of ongoing jokes about his lifestyle. Fact 284. The show has featured dozens of major celebrity guest voices across its run, including from actors, musicians, and athletes. Fact 285. The show's total award record as of available documentation included 37 wins and 121 nominations across various ceremonies. Fact 286. The Simpsons crossover was the longest single episode in Family Guy's history. Fact 287. Lacey Chabert has described her departure from the role of Meg as having been of her own accord. Fact 288. In the Season 10 episode Back to the Pilot, the show showed early versions of the characters and acknowledged how much everything had changed. Fact 289. Stewie's actual voice, without the British accent, sounds like a higher-pitched version of Brian's voice, closer to McFarlane's natural speaking voice. Fact 290. The Family Guy DVD sets were among the first television home video releases to demonstrate that a canceled show could be commercially viable after its broadcast run. Fact 291. American Dad moved from Fox to TBS after its 11th season, and the move was credited with giving the writers more creative freedom. Fact 292. American Dad's decision not to use cutaway gags forced its writing staff to tell complete stories in each episode. Fact 293. Roger the alien in American Dad has the ability to adopt entirely different personas in each episode, giving the writers an inexhaustible source of new characters. Fact 294. The writing staff credit for the Brian and Stewie Bottle episode shows very few names, reflecting how precisely focused the episode was. Fact 295. Family Guy has produced more seasons with the softer version of Stewie than with the original Evil Genius version. Fact 296. McFarlane and the writers have said they felt the evil baby joke had been taken as far as it could go, a claim that many fans dispute given the show's subsequent longevity. Fact 297. The show's move from Sunday to Wednesday nights mirrored the scheduling chaos that had contributed to its original cancellations in the early 2000s. Fact 298. Family Guy's first episode contained cutaway gags, meaning the format was present in the show from the very first broadcast. Fact 299. In the early seasons, cutaway gags were brief additions to existing plots. In later seasons, they became the primary structure around which plots were built. Fact 300. Despite all of its complications, commercial pressures, creative debates, and changes in quality, Family Guy remains one of the longest-running animated sitcoms in American television history, and the audience it built during its golden years proved loyal enough to sustain it through everything that came after. And there it is. 300 Facts About Family Guy. 300 Pieces of a Story that is genuinely one of the stranger and more remarkable stories in television history. A show created by a 24-year-old art school graduate, canceled twice, resurrected by DVD sales and late-night cable reruns, and kept alive by an audience that cared about it more than the network that broadcast it did. A show that found something original and true in its earliest seasons, and then spent many subsequent seasons trying to recover that original quality with varying degrees of success. Whatever you think about where the show ended up, the story of how it began, the thesis film, the security guard's Rhode Island accent, the 15-minute pilot, the Super Bowl premiere, the cancellation, the Adult Swim miracle is worth knowing. It is a story about what happens when one specific person's very specific creative vision finds an audience willing to follow it through everything. If you made it this far, thank you for spending this time here. If you enjoyed this, hitting that subscribe button genuinely helps. And leaving a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is on your end is one of the best parts of doing this. These facts were built to keep you company through a long night, a long commute, or a restless evening when your brain needs something to settle on. Thanks for letting them do that. Get some rest when you need it. The rest of the facts will be here when you wake up. End of script. Number. Section 14. Deep lore. The characters nobody talks about enough. Family Guy's world is populated by a cast of secondary and tertiary characters whose histories are as rich and detailed as any of the principals, and spending time with them reveals how carefully the writers built out the fabric of Quahog even when those characters were not the center of attention. Tricia Takanawa, the Asian-American field reporter for Quahog's Channel 5 News, is one of those recurring characters whose every appearance generates comedy through a specific kind of comedic pressure. She reports on stories with a deadpan efficiency that contrasts with the absurdity of what she is reporting on. She has shown up in episodes set in environments ranging from crime scenes to celebrity events, always maintaining the same professional exterior regardless of how strange the circumstances become. Alex Borstein voices Takanawa, which means she is voicing both the sensible matriarch of the Griffin family and the sensible professional reporter who occasionally crosses paths with that family, and the two characters share almost nothing in terms of register or personality. Seamus, the sailor whose arms and legs are replaced by wooden planks, is one of the show's more committed pieces of sustained absurdism. He was introduced in the first season and has appeared periodically throughout the show's run. The show never explains how Seamus lost his limbs or acquired wooden replacements. It treats his condition as simply part of who he is. He is a regular at the Drunken Clam, and his interactions with Peter and the other regulars play out as if nothing about his physical situation is unusual. This commitment, the show's refusal to comment on what would in any other context be an extraordinary circumstance, is part of what makes the character funny. Ollie Williams, the African-American weatherman for Channel 5 News, is one of the most efficient jokes Family Guy ever devised. He appears briefly in episodes to deliver the weather report, and his reports are always extremely short, extremely direct, and extremely poorly phrased. Phil Lamar voices Williams, and the joke works because it is executed with absolute confidence and brevity. The character does not overstay his welcome. He arrives, delivers something minimalist and somehow accurate, and exits. His brevity is both the joke and the character's defining trait simultaneously. Consuela, the Hispanic cleaning lady voiced by Mike Henry, who appears in various contexts throughout the show's run, became a recurring character whose comedy derives from her absolute single-mindedness. She wants to clean things. She wants Lemon Pledge specifically. She is not particularly interested in the events happening around her unless they interfere with her cleaning. The character has been criticized for stereotyping, but she has also developed a following among fans who find her imperturbability genuinely funny in a specific way. John Herbert, the elderly man who lives across the street and takes an inappropriate interest in Chris, is one of the show's most controversial recurring characters. He is played by Mike Henry as a slow-moving, slow-speaking figure whose every utterance carries a layer of implication that the show never makes fully explicit. He has appeared in numerous episodes over the show's run and was even nominated in a TV guide list of the greatest television characters ever created, which tells you something about the specific kind of dark comedy he represents and the audience it reaches. The character has been criticized for treating pedophilia as a comedic premise, and that criticism is not without merit. Diane Simmons, Tom Tucker's co-anchor on Channel 5 News, was voiced by Lori Allen and served as a contrast to Tucker's pomposity. Where Tucker was self-important and grandiose, Simmons had a more grounded professional quality that made their interactions a kind of comedy of adjacent professional styles. Simmons was eventually given a more substantial storyline in a later season, in which she becomes a villain in a way that the show treated with more dramatic seriousness than most of its supporting character moments. Death himself appears as a recurring character in Family Guy, depicted as a surprisingly awkward and socially insecure figure who has difficulty with normal human interactions despite his vast cosmic authority. When Death needs to take someone, he requires that Peter stand in as a substitute, which draws Peter into Death's world in ways that produce specific comedy. The depiction of Death as emotionally vulnerable and somewhat hapless is a recurring trope in animated comedy, but Family Guy's version has a specific quality of loneliness that the show plays with genuine feeling. The evil monkey who lives in Chris's closet is one of those background joke characters who became something more over the years. He appears initially as a recurring gag. Chris mentions having an evil monkey in his closet. Nobody believes him. The monkey appears and makes a threatening gesture. Chris is terrified. But later episodes revealed that the monkey was not actually evil at all, that he had just had a bad experience with infidelity that had left him bitter, and that his threatening gesture was simply how he processed his ongoing grief. The reveal transformed what had been a pure absurdist gag into a surprisingly sympathetic character beat. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter and his friends regularly spend their time, is one of the show's most consistent and important settings. It is a recognizable type of New England neighborhood bar, worn, dark, full of regulars who have been coming for years. The bar is as much a character as any of the humans who populate it. It has been destroyed and rebuilt in various episodes. It has been the site of numerous confrontations, reconciliations, and comedic set pieces. It is the place where the male friendship at the center of the show's social world gets most of its screen time. Carter Pewterschmidt's yacht is another recurring setting that the show uses to establish the class divide between Lois's family background and the world she lives in with Peter. The yacht is absurdly opulent. Carter uses it casually, the way someone uses a car. He invites people onto it with the expectation that they will be overwhelmed, because in his experience, most people are. Peter, whose reaction to wealth is almost never reverence but rather an immediate desire to consume or destroy whatever is being presented to him, is not a satisfying person for Carter to impress. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, Peter's long-running workplace, has been the site of numerous storylines involving Peter's professional life and his relationship with authority. The brewery makes a beer called Pawtucket Patriot Ale, which Peter drinks with the same enthusiasm he brings to everything he enjoys, which is to say completely without moderation or restraint. His boss at the brewery, Angela, was voiced by Carrie Fisher until Fisher's death in December 2016. Angela was an authority figure who had a complicated relationship with Peter, recognizing his failings clearly, while also finding him, in specific moments, genuinely affecting. Fisher's death meant the character had to be retired, and the show handled this with care. The multiverse episode established that there are versions of Quahog in which things are completely different, a Disney version in which everything is gentle and melodic, a version animated in the crude style of early television, a version in which everything is live action. This suggests that the show's setting is not a fixed reality, but one possibility among many, which gives the entire universe of the show a slightly different quality once you know it. The particular Quahog in which the show is set is not the only Quahog. It is just the one the show follows. Number Section 15. The music of Family Guy songs, scores, and musical moments. Family Guy has a musical dimension that is genuinely impressive when examined closely, and it is one of the aspects of the show that has remained consistently high quality even during periods when other elements of the show were declining. Seth MacFarlane is, by all available evidence, a genuine music enthusiast rather than someone who simply uses music as a comedic tool. He has released multiple albums of big band and jazz standards, performed in concert settings, and surrounded himself with professional musicians throughout his career. This real musical investment shows up in the show's musical content in ways that distinguish Family Guy from most animated comedies. The songs in Family Guy, particularly those that appear in the Road to episodes, are not parodies of songs or funny versions of existing songs. They are original compositions that work as songs first and as comedy second. You've Got a Lot to See, From Road to Rhode Island, is a genuinely good piece of writing in addition to being funny. It has a melodic structure that would work even without the comedic context. The same is true of songs from Road to Europe, Road to Germany, and Road to the Multiverse. The Road to episode songs typically follow the format of classic musical theater. A character's emotional situation gets expressed in a song, the song advances the story, and the audience understands the characters better at the end of the song than they did at the beginning. This is the foundational purpose of the musical number in theater, and the Family Guy Road to songs use it properly. The Season 3 Emmy-winning episode Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows demanded that the show produce original musical content that worked as genuine musical theater. The main song of the episode, which Pearl sings about her past, is written with the kind of simple melodic line and emotionally direct lyric that the best ballads use. It does not wink at the audience. It plays it straight and lets the emotion land. Family Guy Theme, the show's opening title song, is a piece of composition that fits into a very specific American musical tradition, the family sitcom theme of the 1970s and 1980s, the kind of bright, upbeat, instantly memorizable melody that established the emotional tone of the show before a single line of dialogue was spoken. MacFarlane composed it with obvious awareness of this tradition, and it works as both a genuine piece of that tradition and a gentle parody of it simultaneously. The show has used classical music in interesting ways throughout its run. Stewie's sophistication is often musically underlined with orchestral references that position him as someone whose taste exists in a different register from the pop culture world around him. When Stewie is angry, the music around him suggests a particular kind of theatrical grandeur that his physical size makes funny. The show's approach to pop music parody is somewhat different from its approach to original songs. When the show references or parodies an existing song, it typically does so with enough specificity to make clear that the writers know the material they are working with. The parody of Oklahoma that appeared in an early episode demonstrated familiarity with the original musical's specific conventions. The references to Broadway shows scattered throughout the series suggest a writing room with genuine musical theater knowledge rather than just a general awareness that musical theater exists. Walter Murphy's instrumental scoring is worth discussing separately from the vocal music because it does a lot of work that viewers may not consciously notice. The score shifts tone from scene to scene with a flexibility that a less skilled composer would struggle to achieve. A moment of genuine emotion gets underscore that supports rather than undercuts it. A comedic moment gets music that enhances the timing without explaining the joke. A transition between emotional registers is navigated by the score in real time, and when it works well, it is invisible. You feel the shift without knowing the music made it happen. The Season 8 episode, Something, 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 Dark Side, required the show to engage directly with John Williams' iconic Star Wars score, which is one of the most recognizable pieces of film music in history. The show's approach was to use the Williams music rather than parody it, treating the original score as the correct musical environment for the Star Wars universe being depicted, and making the comedy come from the characters rather than from any musical irreverence. This was a smart choice that respected both the source material and the audience's familiarity with it. Road to the North Pole. The Christmas special from Season 9 featured an extended original song sequence that worked as genuine Christmas music in addition to being funny. The song had the melodic warmth and major key brightness that Christmas music requires, and MacFarlane and Brian's performance of it within the episode had a genuine sweetness that the more cynical aspects of the episode's premise did not undermine. The episode I Dream of Jesus, which featured the return of Surfin' Bird as a central comedic device, demonstrated the show's ability to build an entire episode around a single piece of existing music through the pure commitment of repetition. Peter becomes obsessed with the song, and the show commits to playing it so many times within a single episode that the joke moves through funny, past funny, into something uncomfortable, and then back around to funny again. The episode is a case study in how repetition itself can be a comedic tool if applied with enough conviction. The show has incorporated musical guest performers in ways that ranged from brief comedic cameos to more integrated appearances. The format of animated television makes these integrations easier than in live-action shows. A singer can provide their voice for a scene that features an animated version of themselves without the logistical challenges of appearing in person. Number. Section 16. Quahog and the World, the show built. The fictional town that Family Guy calls home was not built overnight. It developed over many seasons into something that has a genuine sense of geography, history, and community. A place that feels, within the logic of the show, like it has been there for a long time, and will continue to be there after the camera moves on. The name itself comes from the Rhode Island quahog clam, a specific regional reference that grounds the show's setting in a recognizable New England identity. Rhode Island is one of the smaller and less nationally prominent American states, and choosing it as the show's setting was a deliberate move away from the more obvious options. New York and Los Angeles had already been claimed by dozens of other shows. New England had a specific flavor, working class, culturally particular, slightly insular, that served the Griffin family's social world well. The town has consistent recurring locations: the Griffin House at 31 Spooner Street, the Drunken Clam Bar, the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, and later the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery, James Woods Regional High School, where Meg and Chris attend, Channel 5 News headquarters, and the various churches and community buildings that appear when the story requires them. These locations create a sense of spatial coherence, even when the show is not particularly careful about maintaining consistency in other respects. James Woods Regional High School was named after the actor James Woods, who later appeared in the show in a recurring character role. This is one of those details that becomes funnier once you know it. The high school named after a celebrity who then turns up as a recurring character in the show with that name attached to a school. The town appears to be located somewhere in coastal Rhode Island, though the specific geography is never fixed. The show implies proximity to the ocean in various episodes, and characters have traveled to Newport and other specific Rhode Island locations in storylines that keep the setting anchored in a recognizable region. The community around the Griffins includes a remarkably diverse range of personalities for a small American town. You have a CIA agent living in one of the houses, and an elderly man whose specific situation ought to have required intervention long before now. You have a police officer who is a genuine hero of the community. You have a news anchor who takes himself far more seriously than his local market justifies. You have a Greek-American diner owner, various religious figures, and an assortment of neighbors whose specific comedic quirks are defined by a single personality trait pushed to its extreme. This is the cast of a small American community seen through a specifically satirical lens. The school attended by the Griffin children is drawn with the specificity of a real institution. It has hallways, a cafeteria, a gym, classrooms, a principal's office, and a social hierarchy that the show depicts consistently. The teachers are variously indifferent, cruel, or incompetent in ways that exaggerate real educational experiences. The popular students are brutal in the way that popular students in American high school mythology are always brutal. The church that the Griffin family attends periodically has been the site of various episodes that examine religion's role in American family life. Peter's Catholicism, which is established in the early episodes and then inconsistently maintained throughout the show's run, has been used as a comedic device in multiple contexts, sometimes treating religious practice with gentle affection, and sometimes using it for pointed satire. The hospital where Dr. Hartman works has been the site of numerous medical comedy storylines. The joke with Dr. Hartman is always the same. He is extraordinarily incompetent, and his patients suffer for it. But the show's version of a hospital, in which the incompetent doctor is simply part of the landscape rather than an urgent problem to be addressed, captures something real about the way American patients can feel overwhelmed and bewildered by healthcare systems they do not fully understand. The Drunken Clam, as a specific kind of New England neighborhood bar, is drawn with enough cultural specificity to feel real in a way that generic TV bars do not. It is the kind of place where the same people have been sitting in the same seats for years, where everyone knows your name, not because the bar has cultivated an atmosphere of warmth, but because the bar has simply been there long enough that the regulars have nowhere else to go. The television above the bar always shows something relevant to the plot. The bartender knows when to listen and when to let things play out. It is a fictional institution that serves the emotional function of a real institution, which is perhaps the highest compliment you can pay to a television setting. Number Section 17. The animation evolution. What changed and why it matters. Animation is not just the medium through which Family Guy tells its stories. It is an active component of how those stories land, and the changes in the show's animation style across its long run have had direct consequences for the show's comedic effectiveness. The rougher, slightly looser animation of the first 2 or 3 seasons had an energy that matched the humor. When Peter moved through a physical comedy bit in those early seasons, the animation had a quality of being slightly out of control. The character felt like he could do something unexpected at any moment because the animation itself had an improvisational looseness. This was partly a function of the budget and the specific animation studios being used, but it was also a quality that the show's comedy benefited from enormously. By contrast, the cleaner, more polished animation of the later seasons sometimes works against the comedy. When everything looks precise and controlled, physical humor can feel less spontaneous. A fall that should feel chaotic is processed more smoothly, and the gap between what should feel wild and what the animation delivers is visible. The animation got technically better in some ways, while getting comedically less effective in others. The decision-making around animation studios was driven partly by budget, partly by availability, and partly by the quality of work each studio delivered. Rough Draft Studios' tenure on the show represents the period when the animation was most consistently excellent in the specific ways that matter for comedy timing, expressiveness, and the physical weight of the characters' movements. Digital E-Mation's work is competent professional animation but lacks the same specific energy. One area where the show's animation has consistently excelled regardless of which studio was doing the work is in the depiction of the background environments. Quahog's streets, interiors, and public spaces are drawn with a level of detail that rewards attention. There are jokes in the backgrounds of Family Guy episodes that a viewer watching casually will never notice. The show's prop department and background artists have populated the world with references, sight gags, and specific details that give the setting a richness it might not otherwise have. The character designs themselves have remained remarkably consistent across 25 years and multiple studios. Peter's shape, his glasses, his specific pink-on-white color scheme, these have not changed in any fundamental way since the pilot. The consistency of the character designs across such a long production run with so many different animation teams is an achievement that requires continuous effort and careful documentation. The giant chicken fights represent the show's most ambitious animation sequences. Each successive chicken fight has been more elaborately choreographed than the last, with more environmental destruction, more physical specificity, and more visual scale. The fights move through multiple locations, incorporating gravity, momentum, and physical consequence in ways that the show's regular animation does not attempt. They are small-scale action films embedded within a comedy, and the animation department has risen to the challenge of executing them at a level of quality that is visually exciting even when the joke behind them has been established since Season 2. The Road to the Multiverse episode's multiple visual styles required the animation department to essentially produce several completely different shows within a single episode. The Disney-style sequence required character designs, coloring techniques, and animation principles borrowed from early Disney features. The retro 1960s Flintstone-style sequence required the team to deliberately produce cruder, less technically sophisticated animation to create the parody effect. Each of these styles demanded a specific kind of production knowledge, and the fact that the episode executed all of them successfully within a single half-hour is a genuine production achievement. Number final section. The show's place in history. What it means that Family Guy existed. There is a version of the Family Guy story that ends with the cancellation in 2002. In that version, the show runs for 3 seasons, builds a small but enthusiastic following, gets shuffled around the schedule until the audience loses track of it, and quietly disappears. MacFarlane goes on to do other things. The characters of Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian remain as a footnote in the history of late 1990s animation. A show that had something interesting going on but never quite found its audience. That is not the version that happened. The version that happened is one of the stranger and more instructive stories in television history, and its strangeness does not decrease with familiarity. A show that was canceled twice was resurrected by fans who would not let it die. A format that critics called lazy and derivative proved resilient enough to sustain a cultural conversation for over 2 decades. A creator who stepped back from his creation watched it continue without him, producing work of inconsistent quality but undeniable cultural persistence. What Family Guy proved, most clearly and most usefully, was that the relationship between a show and its audience could be more powerful than the relationship between a show and its network. Fox canceled Family Guy. Fox moved it around the schedule until the audience couldn't find it. Fox let the syndication rights go for minimal compensation. And the audience found the show anyway, on Adult Swim, on DVD, on streaming, on YouTube clips, and TikTok compilations. The audience's attachment to Family Guy outlasted every institutional decision to let it go. This matters beyond Family Guy specifically, because it changed how the television industry thought about the relationship between networks and audiences. The question, what does this show mean to the people who watch it, became, after Family Guy, a question with measurable commercial consequences. An audience that cares about a show is an asset that has value even when the show itself is not on the air. That insight is now common wisdom in the streaming era, but Family Guy helped demonstrate it first. The show's influence on comedic format is harder to measure but equally real. The cutaway gag structure that Family Guy refined and popularized became a template for many subsequent animated comedies. Shows that came after it, some of them created by people who grew up watching Family Guy, used the same rapid-fire reference style, the same willingness to interrupt a narrative with a disconnected gag, the same reliance on cultural shorthand as comedic currency. Whether that influence produced good work or lazy work depended entirely on how thoughtfully it was applied. The specific combination of irreverence and warmth that the early seasons achieved, a show that was willing to be offensive but that also genuinely loved its characters, proved difficult to sustain and even more difficult to replicate. Many shows have tried. Most have gotten one element or the other right without finding the balance. The balance is the hard part. Seth MacFarlane at 24 created something that was genuinely original. The Life of Larry became Family Guy, and Family Guy became a cultural institution that outlasted multiple cancellations, a writer's strike, the complete upheaval of the television landscape, and its own creators' declining interest in actively steering it. The show kept going. The audience kept watching, in smaller numbers but with the same fundamental affection for the world and the characters that the early seasons had created. That affection is the real story, not the ratings numbers, not the critical consensus, not the specific creative choices that people argue about in comment sections and online forums. The story is that something was made that people loved, and they loved it enough to keep coming back to it for 25 years, and they loved it enough to bring it back from the dead when the network let it go. That is an unusual thing in the history of any creative medium, and Family Guy's version of it is worth remembering. The show that airs now is not the show that premiered in 1999, but the show that premiered in 1999 is still there, in the first 3 seasons, exactly as it was. The golden years are preserved. Stewie is still dangerous. Brian is still the voice of reason. Peter still means well even when he is making everything worse. Lois is still holding the family together with both hands. Meg is still just a normal teenager who deserves better than she usually gets. Those characters as they were, in those seasons, before everything changed, that is what people were fighting for when they bought the DVDs and watched the reruns and sent enough signals to bring the whole thing back. And whatever has happened since, that fight was worth having. Thank you for spending this time with these facts. If there is something in here that surprised you, or something you knew already that you wanted to hear again, I am glad it was here for you. If you enjoyed this enough to want more like it, subscribing means you will be there for the next one. Rest well wherever you are tonight. End of full script Uncle Guy lore. Number. Additional facts and details. The things that fill the gaps. There are always more facts. The longer a show has been running, the deeper the well of specific details, production stories, and pieces of trivia that have accumulated around it. Here are the ones that did not fit cleanly into any of the preceding sections but are worth knowing. The show's pilot episode was actually produced twice. Fox received the initial 15-minute presentation from MacFarlane and then commissioned a full-length pilot. The full pilot was produced and aired as part of the regular first season rather than as a separate preview episode, which means that Death Has a Shadow served as both the pilot and the first broadcast episode simultaneously. The production of the full pilot on the schedule and budget Fox provided was, by MacFarlane's account, an extremely pressured experience. Family Guy has made references to nearly every major piece of American pop culture from the 1950s through the present, but its references to 1980s culture are particularly dense and specific. The decade occupies a special place in the show's comic imagination, perhaps because it was the decade of MacFarlane's own childhood and adolescence. References to 1980s television, film, music, and cultural events appear throughout the series with a specificity that suggests genuine personal investment rather than merely general cultural awareness. The show has been broadcast in numerous international markets, often with local dubbing rather than subtitles. The process of adapting Family Guy's humor for different cultural contexts involves specific translation challenges because so much of the comedy depends on references that are either deeply American or depend on the audience sharing a specific cultural vocabulary. Some jokes translate seamlessly across cultures. Others require complete replacement with locally relevant material. The international production teams that handle this work have varying degrees of creative latitude depending on the market and the production contract. One of the more unusual pieces of Family Guy merchandise history involves the show's relationship with video games. The franchise has produced numerous games across multiple platforms and decades, including Family Guy, Back to the Multiverse, released in 2012, which was a third-person shooter in which players moved through locations from the show. The game was not particularly well reviewed, but demonstrated the range of commercial uses that the Family Guy license could be applied to. The franchise has also appeared in Fortnite, the massively popular online game, which in 2023 added Family Guy characters as cosmetic options, a collaboration that brought the show's visual identity into a game played by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. The show's relationship with Star Wars, established through the Blue Harvest trilogy, extended beyond those specific parody episodes into ongoing references throughout the series. George Lucas saw the Blue Harvest parody and apparently found it sufficiently respectful of the source material to give it his blessing, which allowed the show to use actual Star Wars music, visual design elements, and character references in ways that would otherwise have raised serious intellectual property questions. Peter Griffin has broken the fourth wall in numerous episodes across the show's run, acknowledging that he is a character in a television show, commenting on Fox's scheduling decisions, or speaking directly to the audience about something happening in the plot. The frequency of these fourth-wall moments increased in the later seasons, and the show began making regular jokes about its own declining quality. This self-awareness, the show acknowledging that it is not as good as it once was, is itself a point of contention among fans, some of whom find it charming and honest, and others of whom find it a convenient substitute for actually improving. The Griffins' living room furniture has remained essentially unchanged since the pilot. The couch, the television, the window behind the couch, all of these have been fixtures of the show's visual identity since the beginning. There is something comforting about the consistency of those objects. Whatever else changes in the show, you can always find the Griffins where you left them, in that living room, on that couch, watching that television. MacFarlane has spoken about his musical interests in terms that suggest a deep personal investment. He has performed with major orchestras and recorded with professional session musicians who work across the full range of American popular and classical music. His albums of big band standards, which include material from the Great American Songbook, the canon of Broadway and Hollywood songs from roughly the 1930s through the 1960s, were received with a mixture of surprise and genuine appreciation by audiences who had not expected the creator of Family Guy to be a serious interpreter of that musical tradition. The album sold well and demonstrated a dimension of MacFarlane's creative personality that the television work did not fully express. The show has had moments of genuine social commentary across its run that stand up to scrutiny independent of the comedy context. Episodes addressing addiction, disability, gender identity, class dynamics, media manipulation, and the relationship between religion and public life have at various points engaged with their subjects with more seriousness than casual viewers might expect. The show has not always handled sensitive subjects with grace, and it has attracted criticism for its missteps, but its ambition to engage with difficult material has been consistent, even when the execution has been inconsistent. One detail about the show's recording process that is worth knowing: Seth MacFarlane records his lines for all four of his principal characters in a single session, and the cast members who share scenes with those characters are often not in the room when MacFarlane records. This means that the conversations between, say, Brian and Lois, or Peter and Stewie, are assembled from recordings made at different times by different people, and the editors and sound designers are responsible for creating the illusion of a conversation happening between people who were never in the same room at the same time. The seamlessness of these assembled dialogues, across thousands of episodes and many different recording sessions, is itself a production achievement. The show's depiction of Rhode Island, while fictional, has been embraced by the state in a complicated way. Rhode Islanders who are fans of the show find specific local references pleasing in the way that any regional audience enjoys seeing their home depicted on screen. Those who are not fans find the depiction unflattering in ways that are familiar to anyone from a small state that is frequently overlooked by national media. The real Providence, the real Newport, the real coastal communities of Rhode Island exist alongside the fictional Quahog in a relationship that the show exploits for ongoing comedy. The number of voice actors who have appeared on Family Guy over its 25 years is in the hundreds, ranging from principal cast members who have been with the show since the beginning to single-episode guest performers who provided a voice for one character in one scene. This accumulation of voices, over 461 episodes, represents an extraordinary collective achievement of performance that goes largely unacknowledged because animated voice acting is still dramatically underappreciated compared to on-screen performance. The show's final episode, whenever it comes, will be an event. Not because of what it will contain, necessarily, but because of what it will represent the end of a run that has lasted longer than most people expected at any point in its history, that has survived more adversity than most shows have faced, and that has meant something specific to a generation of viewers who grew up with it. The Griffin family will go on, in reruns and on streaming, indefinitely. But the end of new episodes will mark a genuine transition, the moment when the show stops being a present-tense phenomenon and becomes fully a historical one. Until that moment, it continues. Every season, 15 episodes. Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, and Brian, in their living room in Quahog, watching television, getting into trouble, making each other miserable in the specific ways that families do, and occasionally not as often as before, but still occasionally reminding you of what the early seasons felt like and why anyone fell in love with this show in the first place. That occasional reminder is worth something. It keeps the door open. It keeps the memory alive. And for as long as the show keeps producing those moments, even sparsely, there is a reason to keep the television on.